Thank you very much, Leonor. Good morning to everyone by me as well, and welcome again to the EMA. It's my pleasure to start today's presentations or educational part of the Info Day, telling you about scientific advice in, I guess, I would say quite a bit of detail. So I think this will be quite informative for yourselves. And my presentation is going to be divided into three parts. First, I'm going to explain what scientific advice is. Then we're going to discuss how it works, a little bit about the process itself and the do's and don'ts, I guess. And finally, time permitting, we'll discuss a bit about some variations of the basic scientific advice process. We'll see whether we'll be able to get to the end of all of that information in 40 minutes, but I'll do my best. So starting with what scientific advice is, based on the legal definition, scientific advice is the advice given by regulators on the various tests and trials that are necessary in order to demonstrate the quality, safety, and efficacy of medicinal products that are in development. Effectively, scientific advice is advice on what it is, what are the evidentiary requirements that regulators would like to see in order to allow an authorization of the medicine. It can cover any aspect of the dossier that supports a marketing authorization application, starting from quality, going into non-clinical and clinical requirements. It can also extend into a risk management plan and plans for post-authorization efficacy or safety studies. You can ask questions about methodological aspects, modeling and simulation, data analysis, and whatnot. And also, scientific advice covers all types of products and marketing authorization. So whether it's a full marketing authorization, a conditional marketing authorization, or exceptional circumstances, whether you're developing a generic, a hybrid drug, even drugs that are effectively intended for national authorization, not necessarily for centralized authorization. We discuss even developments in children, pediatric developments. So effectively, every aspect of drug development is fair game, for scientific advice. Scientific advice is prospective in nature, so it focuses on development strategies, things that you plan to do, not things that you have already done, because if things have been done, then we're talking about data assessment for the purposes of a marketing authorization application. And it takes the form of specific questions that need to be answered. So what we ask you to provide is a summary of your development plan at the time that you apply for scientific advice, followed by questions supported by a rationale or some explanation as to the questions that you're asking. And of course, you can already suspect that there are questions that you can ask and then questions that you cannot ask in scientific advice. But types of questions that you could ask, for example, can pertain to the patient population that you plan to include in a future clinical study, the endpoints that you're going to measure, the statistical analysis plan that is supporting the study, the duration of the study, and whether the study will overall be adequate to support the marketing authorization, the choice of the comparator, if any, if it's a control study. Or it can be something like, I'm planning to come with this data package, this evidence package, for scientific advice, for marketing authorization, and then I would like to perform some post-authorization safety or efficacy studies to complement, the information collected during development. So all of these are questions that you're very welcome to ask in scientific advice. On the other hand, as I said, there are questions that we discourage at minimum. So a question whether a set of studies or an overall development plan would be adequate to support the marketing authorization. Okay, it's a very general question, but it is a fair question because it's still about your plan, what you plan to do in order to create the dossier, complete the dossier, supporting a marketing authorization application. But if you've done your studies and then you want to ask whether the results that you've already obtained are adequate to support the marketing authorization, well, this is actually a pre-assessment question, though, a question that we would generally ask you to remove or discourage. A particularity pertains to pediatric developments. There's been quite a bit of fuss in the last couple of years, because we made an update in our public guidance, trying to explain a little bit, what would be the questions that you can come and ask in scientific advice in relation to pediatric developments, and what are the questions that you shouldn't ask. Try a little bit to disentangle the scope of the remit of the pediatric committee, which is overall responsible to agree the overall development plan, and then the remit of the scientific advice. So we generally, again, discourage the types of questions like, can the proposed studies support an indication in a subset on the full pediatric population? Because these are actually, questions under the remit of the PDCO. You're welcome to come and ask questions about the specifics of studies, the design elements of studies that you plan to do, pediatric studies that you plan to do. But scientific advice given on the studies should not be understood as, agreement or bind really the decision of the PDCO eventually, if you come to scientific advice before you go to PDCO, because at the time that you go to the PDCO, you present to them your overall development plan. Often in scientific advice, we see questions on specific studies that you want to do and don't have the overall picture. I think I spent enough time explaining what would be acceptable and not acceptable questions. Another form, well, it's not necessarily another form, but scientific advice on orphan designated medicinal products is called protocol assistance. This is just because it's called like that in the legislation. Effectively, there's not much difference between scientific advice and protocol assistance. But protocol assistance, so if you're developing an orphan medicinal product, you're entitled to fee incentives, okay, relating to the orphan product. And one of the fee incentives is you get reductions in scientific advice. You get a 75% fee reduction, actually, if it's an SME developing an orphan, or if it's an academic nonprofit organization, you get the full fee waiver for scientific advice, for protocol assistance. The other difference of protocol assistance is that you can ask questions on the criterion of significant benefit. So in order for a product to be designated as orphan, it needs to show that it provides significant benefit over existing therapies. It's one of the criteria for designation. And this is just at the time of orphan designation, but it's also reevaluated at the time of marketing authorization. And if the significant benefit criterion is no longer fulfilled at marketing authorization, the orphan designation may need to be withdrawn, may be lost. So you can actually come and ask questions about studies or trials that you plan to do in order to be able to demonstrate at marketing authorization that your drug continues to provide significant benefit over existing therapy. So another specific question that for protocol assistance that we don't have in scientific advice. And in addition to protocol assistance, we also have something called broad scientific advice. So what is that? Scientific advice is generally product and indication specific. If you are developing a product in multiple indications, the advice on each separate indication should be submitted as a separate request. The same applies if you're, for example, developing two products, in combination, for example, or you are planning to do a platform trial, and there you're going to, include multiple, products. Generally, different products, different requests, different indications, different requests. But there are situations where, for matters of efficiency, we obviously do allow that you come for a single scientific advice request on those cases. So a platform trial, for example, it's effectively, a case where you can ask for broad scientific advice, because ultimately we're discussing about one trial. Okay, there may be multiple products involved in it, but design elements or considerations are the same across the products. Similarly, if you want, for example, you have a product which may be authorized or you plan to authorize in multiple indications, and you want to introduce a quality change that affects multiple indications. Again, this is something for which labeled as broad scientific advice is totally acceptable. So the question often arises, or sometimes arises, why ask for scientific advice? What's the benefit? Is there any benefit? I guess the benefit is a little bit self-explanatory. Okay, if you discuss with the regulators and understand what their evidentiary requirements will be, then you increase your chances of, eventually submitting a successful marketing authorization application. We've actually looked into this in the past. There's like a few publications, available showing that complying with asking for scientific advice and complying with scientific advice is associated with, success of, well, a bit unsurprisingly, success of the marketing authorization. This has also been in a different publication shown specifically for orphan designated products. And one thing important here that came out of these analysis is that for orphan products and also for SME applicants, actually, the chances of success of marketing authorization applications overall are lower compared to big pharma. However, if you receive scientific advice and comply with it, then the chances of the orphan product or the SME applicant being successful pretty much become the same as if it's a non-orphan product or a big pharma company. So I guess important to, especially for SMEs and especially for rare diseases, to ask for scientific advice. And before I move into the process and how it works, I would like to also highlight the fact that in the EU, we don't just have scientific advice from the EMA or centralized scientific advice, as we call it. We also have other forms of scientific advice. So first of all, you can go to national competent authorities, individual member states, and ask for scientific advice. In terms of its scope, the scope is quite wide. I would say very similar, with the scope of centralized scientific advice. However, national scientific advice is more commonly used for products that are intended to be used at a national level or in some, but not all, not EU-wide. It's quite common also for academic applicants. It's also, more common in early stages of drug development, and this is because the authorization of clinical trials is in the EU under the remit of national competent authorities, and hence, if you want to discuss, evidentiary requirements for your subsequent clinical trial application, then in many cases it makes more sense to go to the national competent authorities where you plan to conduct your studies. And for a few years now, we also have another flavor of that, which is called simultaneous national scientific advice. And this is scientific advice given by at least two. Actually, in recent years, we've been in more than two national competent authorities have been involved in a parallel procedure. So these NCAs, they advise, separately, but in parallel in a common, procedure. The scope is again quite similar to the national and the centralized scientific advice, but the focus again is mostly on clinical trials. So if you want to do a multinational clinical trial and you're going to run the study in 3 or 4 EU member states, it would actually make sense to ask for simultaneous national scientific advice from these countries. Again, for academic applicants, for repurposing purposes, and also for early stages of drug development. So again, with a view of subsequent clinical trial application. So if we want to make a broad rule, we would say centralized scientific advice for marketing authorization requirements, national scientific advice or simultaneous national, mostly for clinical trial requirements. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. It is we've received the constructive criticism that the options are multiple, and there's a little bit of confusion often as to where's the best way to go. We have tried to clarify this, so we introduced a link there where you can see the different interaction possibilities that you have for scientific advice and generally about development support in the EU. And of course, we're always open to, receive questions and try to clarify, matters. Okay, so I am now going to move into the process. So how scientific advice works, or centralized to be now specific scientific advice works. And scientific advice is given at the central level by the so-called Scientific Advice Working Party. So the Working Party is a standing working party of the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, the CHMP, the committee providing the opinions for authorization. And for many, many years now, the committee decided that, although initially the committee, with the previous name actually, was giving the scientific advice themselves, they decided many years ago, I think it was 24 years ago, to create the standing working party with the remit of providing scientific advice. It's the only working party that's actually enshrined in the legislation currently. In the future legislation, it's proposed to also have reference to other working parties. And contrary to other working parties, which generally exist for the purpose of developing guidance or guidelines, the Scientific Advice Working Party has the sole remit of providing scientific advice. It works a bit like a committee in the sense that it meets monthly, every month, except in August when we're on holidays. And its composition has evolved its membership has evolved over time, adapting to increasing workload. Currently, we have 72 members and alternates that are nominated based on expertise needs, not based on national representation. So that's a big difference with the committees where you need to have a national representation. So here is based on expertise needs, based on what is the nature of requests that we receive, and it includes also representatives from the majority of EMA committees. What we do is that for each application, for each scientific advice request that we receive or protocol assistance request, we appoint 2 members of the working party as coordinators, as we say. They perform the primary assessment of the application submitted. And then we have at least 1 member which acts as a peer reviewer after the primary assessment is done. And not all discussions on the scientific advice requests finish within the working party. We refer requests to other committees, other working parties, operational expert groups, working groups across the agency to receive peer review input based on the specifics of the application. So, for example, if we have a request for relating to an advanced therapy medicinal product, we will bring this for discussion at the Committee of Advanced Therapies. I'll come back to that a little later on. So this is a little bit the breakdown in terms of expertise of the people involved in the working party. The majority, well, a good number, of course, is clinical pharmacology trial methodology experts, but then we have statisticians, modeling and simulation, non-clinical experts, quality experts, and of course all the major therapeutic areas. If you count, these are not 72 currently because we do have some empty positions. And then I mentioned this before, we don't have national representation, but we have representation based on expertise, and different countries of the EU contribute differently to the composition of the working party. There's a good minority, a healthy minority of EU member states that are not at all represented in the working party. Okay, and then coming back to the issue of referring things or discussing applications outside also the working party. This is a little bit of too much, this and the next slide, a little bit of too much detail, but you can get from this and from this slide, you can get like an appreciation of the number in the middle column, the number of the different EMA committees and working parties that, or other groups that are involved. And of course, for example, it's no surprise that, I don't know, pediatric, requests, are referred, for example, to the pediatric committee, or non-clinical requests sometimes are referred to the non-clinical working party and whatnot. So in relevant working parties and committees that have, a specific relevant, expertise, but also the referral differs. So, for example, we have, we need to go back. I wanted to go back. So there are a couple of things that actually are not discussed in the working party. So all the quality issues, they're not discussed in the we have like 4 quality experts in the scientific advice working party, but to support the discussions as necessary, but the discussions are really happening in the quality and the biologics working party. Okay, and similarly for significant benefit questions relating to orphan designations, these are delegated to the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, so not discussed at all in the working party. For the rest, there is a discussion, but then there may be a systematic or an ad hoc involvement of other committees and working parties as necessary. And sometimes we refer things just for information. How to submit the scientific advice request. So since 2021, we have an online, well, for scientific advice, we have an online platform called IRIS. You may be familiar with it. It's been around since actually 2017, if you want to submit your orphan designation. And over the years, this has grown to encompass, well, maybe not still the majority, but soon it will encompass the majority of applications submitted to the agency. So currently we have scientific advice, orphan designation, pediatric submissions, ITF briefing meeting requests, parallel distribution, all kinds of, some variations even. Starting in 2025, all post-authorization, the plan is for all post-authorization applications actually to be on IRIS. So it's an important platform. It will eventually encompass all, applications and interactions, with the agency. And there's a couple of things, important things to keep in mind here. IRIS in general, in terms of submission, is relatively, straightforward. There are, obviously web forms that you need to fill in. And that's relatively straightforward and easy to do. However, the important bit is kind of the preparatory work. So you need to register your organization, you need to nominate a contact point, you need to actually also register your active substance and your medicinal product, with the agency before you're able to access IRIS and submit your applications. In addition, for products that are in development, we have this concept of a research product identifier. It's a unique identifier composed of numbers and letters that accompanies the product throughout its development. The reason for, or the need for this comes from the fact that, especially in development, products don't have a name. They will start with a chemical name that will transform into a company code, and then it will become an INN, and eventually you will have a trade name, so to speak. So it's important for us, in order to be able to track the regulatory interactions of a product, to have this identifier. So you will also need to request it's a very simple process, that one, but the bottom line is that it takes like a few days to if you haven't done so to do all of these registrations. The good thing is that you do it once and then it's done. But something to keep in mind. There's because IRIS has been around for years. There's quite a few important trainings, very helpful, that you can follow. Recordings, and there's a couple of links here for your information. So how does the procedure then works? How long does it take, for example, to get scientific advice? So for us, the whole process starts at the time of submission, and the submission is received by a deadline which coincides with a monthly meeting of the scientific advice working party. We will take 4 weeks or 30 days, usually until the next meeting, in order to validate your application. And this validation means that we look at the documentation and the questions provided, and then to see whether the questions, the advice itself is within the scope of scientific advice, whether the questions are worded adequately, or you can modify them in order to maximize, the input that you may receive, and whether, of course, the underlying information, the background information is adequate to support, the assessment to be done. That time is also necessary in order for us to identify the coordinators, the 2 coordinators to assign to your application. And that's not a very easy process. We do get, as you'll see later on, around 70 requests, per month. So it's, it's a bit of a process to try to split them, share them between, the working party members. So we take 30 days to validate, and then starts the primary assessment, which, so the procedure coincides with the following scientific advice working party meeting, and then the primary assessment takes us until the following meeting. So another 30 days then for the primary assessment. So in this time, the two coordinators will produce their assessment reports, and then we will have at the following working party meeting, we'll have a discussion. So every single scientific advice request will be discussed at the working party, and the working party will give, the plenary will give a direction as to what, in case that the two coordinators, disagree, or in case the plenary disagrees with the coordinators, that's also an option. It will give a direction as to what would be the advice to be given. And at that time, we will appoint also the peer reviewer of the working party, and then start the peer review process, which takes us 2 weeks. The reason being that scientific advice is still an advice by the CHMP, so it needs to be formally adopted. It's only formally adopted by the CHMP, not by the working party. And the CHMP takes place 2 weeks after the SOP. So we use these 2 weeks, for the peer review finalization of the advice, and then we send you the letter. So overall, we're discussing about a 40-day procedure, 30 days for the primary assessment and 10 days for the peer review. Now, in certain cases, in more recent years, around 10% of the cases, before the pandemic, it was more like 20% of cases. We also have not a face-to-face, these days it's virtual, a meeting with you, but a meeting, with the applicant to discuss different aspects or different, issues or, issues we may be having with your application. So in case of such a discussion meeting, as we call it, this meeting actually happens at the following, working party meeting. So from the discussion of the SOP of the first reports, we take a month or 30 days until the discussion, and then we finalize the advice until the next CHMP. So we add effectively 1 month to the whole process, and that's why we're discussing about the 70-day process. Okay? So that's roughly how the process works. From beginning to end, we have 70 or 100 days from submission until the time that you receive your letter, if we include the validation period. Now, in terms of volumes, and again, just to give you an idea of the workload, this is the evolution of the workload of scientific advice over the years. The three red columns correspond to the years of the pandemic, where we had a peak, especially in 2021. I can assure you that the peak was not only related to the pandemic, it contributed, but it wasn't just due to the pandemic, quite the opposite, I would say. And then we've seen a normalization in more recent years. So last year we were down to almost 700 procedures in the whole year, and this year we're looking at a similar number. So that translates into 65 to 70 applications handled every month. So it's quite a bit of a high volume procedure. Now, fees, we do charge fees for scientific advice. The level of the fee depends on the type and the number of areas of advice. So quality and clinical advice are a bit cheaper than clinical, but then combinations of the 2 or 3 increase the fee. We currently also have different fee levels for initial versus follow-up advice. It's actually a substantial difference, but with the new fee regulation that comes into force in January, this difference is to be abolished. So we're not going to have this anymore. And there are fee incentives, importantly, there are fee incentives for pediatric-only developments, for protocol assistance already mentioned, SMEs. So in general, SMEs, if I remember correctly, get a 90% fee reduction. Also for ATMPs and prime products. And we have a full waiver for orphan products that come from academic applicants, and also for products addressing public health emergencies, declared public health emergencies, okay? However, again, with the new fee regulation as of January, actually any scientific advice request that comes from a non-profit entity, from academics, for example, will be free of charge. So that's a big change that's happening with the new regulation. And I think that I will go now into the variations of the basic process. So first of all, scientific advice can be held in parallel with the US FDA. We recommend this particularly in areas where there's either inexistent guidance, little development, where there's potential divergence in the guidance published by EMA and FDA, also for challenging products in general. We have, this has been in place for years now. We have a very nice general principles document that you can follow. In order to ask for that, you actually need to submit a request in advance to the two agencies. We separately advise whether we can accept or not accept, and if both agencies accept, then we go ahead. The process is like is a regular scientific advice process, but has a discussion meeting by default. So that's a big advantage of the parallel scientific advice. And in addition to this discussion meeting with yourselves as applicants, we also have bilateral interactions to discuss with our FDA colleagues in preparation for the discussion meeting. Importantly, this is a parallel, not a joint advice, so don't expect to get consolidated input. Of course, the aim is to have aligned, feedback from the two agencies. However, each one of the two agencies maintains its decision-making independence. Something similar also happens with HTA bodies, health technology assessment bodies. And health technology assessment is an assessment of effectiveness, safety, and cost effectiveness that informs pricing and reimbursement decisions. And we have national HTA bodies in the EU. This was purely national business until now, for the most part, but we have a new HTA regulation which comes into force also in January 2025. So a lot of things changing in January. And now we're going to have this coordinated HTA assessment by a coordination group. And this regulation foresees two interactions between HTA bodies and regulators. One is called the joint clinical assessment, which is at the time of the marketing authorization. And importantly for our presentation now, joint scientific consultation during development. So think of it as parallel scientific advice with the HTA bodies. And again, the aim is the same. So to try to harmonize as much as possible requirements of regulators and HTA bodies. And also similar is the fact that there is by default a discussion meeting in those cases, plus bilateral interactions between ourselves and the HTA in preparation. Again, the outcome is communicated separately by EMA and HTA bodies. So we've had like few requests in recent years from that fall into this category, but with the new HTA regulation, we expect the numbers to pick up. Scientific advice ahead of clinical trials. I mentioned a little bit a few things under national and simultaneous national scientific advice, but importantly, since June, we have launched 2 pilots to support advice ahead of clinical trials. I'll start on the right side with preclinical trial application advice. This is given by the Clinical Trials Coordination Group, CTCG. So this is not scientific, this is technical and regulatory advice to discuss any logistics around the submission of the clinical trial application. It's a short procedure, 30 days. The application is via the SNSA process, and there are fees associated, with it. And the plan is, because this is a pilot, the plan is to evaluate, the course of the pilot every 5 requests received and make adjustments as necessary. And then with the next 5, requests, there's going to be another evaluation. So this is going a bit better. So, since the June that we started, we have, I think, certainly more than 5, requests. The other pilot that we launched was a SOP CTCG, as we call it, pilot. So this is you want to do your clinical trial, you want to ensure that, whatever you plan to do will not face any issues at the time of the clinical trial application, but also eventually, for the marketing authorization. So you can, get answers to this from the SOP when it comes to MAA, to the marketing authorization application, and also from the clinical trials coordination group when it comes to a clinical trial application. The process that's followed is that of the SOP, so the scientific advice process that I mentioned. The input here is consolidated, so it's not like everybody participating gives their own view. No, we have a consolidated input, but there is an option in the section about other comments for individual member states to mention particular requirements that they may have and for which they feel strongly about. The plan is for this to run for 10 months, to have 10 cases in the pilot. It was launched in June. The uptake is not as good, but we've had like a couple of cases already in the pilot. The important message is that you can request scientific advice ahead of your clinical trial. Qualification of novel methodologies and biomarkers. So this is a different flavor of scientific advice. The focus is no longer a product. It's actually a methodology that can apply to drug development, novel methodology or a novel use of an existing methodology that can be applied in drug development. And so somebody can come, bring their methodology to be qualified or to receive regulatory support for the use of this methodology in a specific, as we call it, context of use. What could be these methodologies? It could be a biomarker to predict toxicity or to enrich a patient population. It could be a surrogate or a novel and clinical endpoint. More recently, digital endpoints, for example, very, a la mode. Clinical outcome assessment measures like patient-reported outcomes, but also we've been qualifying over the years patient and disease registries, statistical methodologies, modeling and simulation methodologies. We're starting to see non-clinical, novel non-clinical methods. Anything that's a novel methodology can come. Important to note that the focus should be on the methodology, not on the specific platform that supports this methodology. And we will qualify the methodology, not the platform. So this is not qualification of, say, a medical device. And in general, the qualification per se is, quite a complicated process. It involves meta-analysis of multiple data sources. So most likely, in most cases, we won't see this coming from like individual companies. It would come from consortia or, IMI or IHI, initiatives and things like this. Okay, I'll mention the PRIME scheme as well because I don't think we have a presentation on this. So priority medicines is a scheme, or PRIME is a scheme that started by the agency in 2017, and it's intended to foster the development of medicines that have a major public health interest with in areas of unmet medical need. It's really about promising, medicines that show a significant promise to address an unmet medical need. And the reason why I mention it here is, the scheme goes well beyond scientific advice, but it's the eligibility request per se that follows effectively a process similar to the scientific advice. So the request is assessed by the scientific advice working party. Eventually, the CHMP decides whether to grant or not to grant the PRIME designation, so to accept the product in the scheme or not. And why apply for this? Because then you get an early appointment of a rapporteur for a product, so you get reinforced scientific and regulatory support, and of course increased interactions in terms of scientific advice. Ultimately, because the criteria for designating a product as PRIME are the same as the ones for accelerated assessment of the MAA, you can also get the same. So you can get your MAA to be assessed in an accelerated fashion. And I think that's the last one. For public health emergencies, we have scientific advice, again, a different flavor, in the sense that it's not provided by the Scientific Advice Working Party. Instead, it's provided by the Emergency Task Force of the EMA. This came together at the time of the COVID pandemic, but afterwards it's been enshrined in the legislation. The ETF deals not only with declared public health emergencies, like we had the COVID and slightly later the monkeypox, but also it concerns itself with pathogens or agents, not just pathogens, but also other agents that have a potential to call public health emergencies. So when we don't have a declared emergency, we're in preparedness, so to speak, mode. And the ETF deals with, influenza, for example, vaccines, because they could cause a PHE at some point. We encourage for you to have early contact with the ETF in case you're developing something like this, and there's an email address for this. You can also get guidance and advice even in advance of a formal scientific advice request. And during the public health emergency, the advice follows, or at least with the COVID, it followed an accelerated timetable. In the preparedness period, it follows the regular timetable of scientific advice. It's also free of charge during the declared emergency. And importantly, it's in the legislation that if you, for clinical trials that you plan to do for drugs addressing a PHE, in that case, the ETF involves national competent authorities that will authorize your clinical trial. So you're ensured to have a coordinated view on your clinical trial. So, just to wrap up, and I think I'm right on time. Scientific advice. We start presentations today with scientific advice because it really constitutes the core of regulatory support during medicine's development. Okay? Important to remember that the wording of your questions is quite critical in order for you to make the most out of a scientific advice request. It's worth coming for scientific advice because it can help you later with your marketing authorization application. And you have to be well prepared to preempt technical issues with all the registration steps that I mentioned. Important, to get on the IRIS platform sooner than later. As I said, eventually will be used for any regulatory interaction with the EMA. And of course, scientific advice framework has been evolving. We started with scientific advice protocol assistance. We added qualification at some point, the parallel advice with the FDA and the HTAs, advice for public health emergencies, more recently. And I haven't mentioned advice for medical devices and drug device combinations because we have a dedicated session on that in the afternoon.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and good morning, everyone. I will put on screen the slides. I will start the presentation with an overview of ACT-EU, as was anticipated, is the initiative to accelerate clinical trials in the European Union. I will also mention provide some information in relation to CITIS, the Clinical Trial Information System, and then my colleague Francesca will take over for the publication rules, the transparency aspect of CTIS. About ACT-EU, let's start from the challenges that we have identified in the EU clinical trial landscape in relation to the need to have more impactful multinational, multi-country trials to drive the decision-making process, the need for an overarching strategy to bring key stakeholders together. Is quite an heterogeneous panorama where we have different parties involved with multiple actors requiring clear roles and responsibilities. And of course, the need to leverage the EU strong healthcare system that we have and the research infrastructure. So starting from the difficulties, from the challenges that have been identified over the course of the last few years, the vision of ACT-EU is really to render the European Union as an attractive place for conducting clinical research with a vision to have larger, more impactful clinical trials with a clear and seamless coordination between the regulators, so national competent authorities, ethics committee, and the stakeholders and sponsors, to have a clear dialogue and a smooth process for authorization and conduct of clinical trials. Having smart trials through regulatory, technological, and process innovation, and of course empowering and engaging and supporting stakeholders. And in my slides, you will see that I have a dedicated point on the establishment of the multi-stakeholder platform advisory group that really serve this purpose of engaging more with the stakeholders and increasing dialogue. So about the program, the ACT-EU program, you can see illustrated in these slides the 11 priority actions that we have. So there are different work streams. We are looking at different aspects on clinical research, and I will go in this presentation in some more details for some of the priority actions. But this is really to give you an overview of the structure of the program, has reflected in the ACT-EU work plan. The current work plan is covering the period of time 2023-26. We published it in November last year, and towards the end of this year, we will update and we will publish a new version. So first, priority action on mapping and governance. I think it's important to recognize that we have many different actors, many parties, working group, working parties, or all dealing with a different remit and different focus in the field of clinical trials. Some of these working groups are managed by the European Commission. If we think about the CTAG, for example, defined in the regulation, others are established under the framework of HMA, like for example the CTCG, the Clinical Trials Coordination Group, and other groups are of course managed by the EMA. So we publish this visual supported by a table giving an overview of all the different groups that we have and their remit and scope. So hopefully this will help stakeholders to navigate better the landscape and have a vision of the different roles and responsibilities. Anchored to this priority action is CTR Collaborate. CTR Collaborate is a very important initiative led by the CTCG that is looking at harmonizing and improving the process for the implementation of the CTR within the member states, so focus really on the dialogue between national competent authorities and ethics committees, but also between the member states, so to facilitate collaboration. I'm sure you are aware of the requirements of the CTR with the RMS, the reporting member states in the lead, consolidation of consideration for part 1, having an harmonized approach on the assessment of the dossier. This is one of the objectives, for example, in the scope of CTR Collaborate, as well as increasing and streamlining the process for collaboration with the ethics committee. The second priority action is focused and is specific on the implementation of the clinical trials regulation. So the clinical trials regulation, which became applicable in January 2022, brings, as we all know, substantial changes on the operational standpoint, on the use of the new system of cities, but also on the procedural side, on the operational aspect, on collaboration between the member states. Under this work stream in ACT-EU, we published on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, a key performance indicator report. So we have published these reports since May 2022. They are all available in our ACT-EU website, and consulting these monthly reports, you can really see the trend of how many applications we receive on a monthly basis, how many have been authorized. There are statistics per therapeutic areas, trial phase, number of member states that have been appointed as RMS. So hopefully it's informative for the public to see the trend of the implementation of the CTR. As a second activity, we have launched regular surveys that have been submitted purely to the CTIS users, because we really recognize the importance of hearing from the users on their experience on the use of the system, but also more broadly on the implementation of the CTR. The third work stream that we have under the Priority Action 2 is on the transitioning of clinical trials. According to the regulation, there is a dedicated article defining a 3-year transition period. So this means that by January 2025, so 3 years since the launch of cities, all the clinical trials will need to be governed by the regime of the CTR. So the sponsors have few months left to transition their trials, that if they're still ongoing and expected to be ongoing after January, they have to be moved to cities. So quite a substantial amount of work and joining efforts with the Commission and the Member States on clarifying the requirements for transitional trials. Here the reference to EUDRELEX Volume 10 and the CTCG website, where you can find the relevant documents in relation to transition, supported by a dedicated communication campaign. Last bullet point is on the revised transparency rules, and my colleague Francesca will guide you through the revised public portal. I really want to emphasize the importance of having this new version of the public website. It went live in June, and we have added new features in September. Non-commercial sponsors, dedicated support to non-commercial sponsors. So looking at the statistics, we see that, okay, there are few trials conducted by non-commercial sponsors, but they're still a little bit behind if we look at the figures versus commercial sponsors, and still predominantly non-commercial sponsors conduct mononational clinical trials. So we have now a dedicated work stream under ACT-EU with a group of colleagues with expertise on cities, but also on the regulatory aspect, to have a regulatory help desk, if you want, a dedicated channel that can be used by non-commercial sponsors and academia to contact the EMA and clarify any questions that they might have on the use of cities, but also on a regulatory aspect. And in the next slide, I can give you a flavor of what we have put in place. First of all, we have launched in June of this year an interactive map that looks a little bit like you can see on the right-hand side. This is available on our ACT-EU website. Users can zoom in the country and see the existing initiative already provided by the member states to support non-commercial sponsors. Of course, we work with CTCG to capture this information, and now this is compiled in the website. We are also gathering information from network entities, for example, from EMPRIMA. We had an interaction with the colleagues dealing with the pediatric network, so we also included information on EMPRIMA. I mentioned the dedicated regulatory help desk, particularly a focus on cities functionalities. And when it comes to the next steps, because really this is an important focus area, we plan to consult the academia representatives of the multi-stakeholder platform advisory group to understand any further needs that they might have. The next priority action is about GCP modernization. Of course, the revision of ICH E6R3 following the public consultation and the finalization of the text. We know that the focus is on principles and the Annex 1. The adoption in the region by the CHMP is expected, of course, for Q4 of this year. And after the adoption by the CHMP, we know that there is a 6 months period before the revised text will become applicable, and this will be then supported by change management initiatives, training initiatives, and in order to address this, we are planning a dedicated workshop that will be broadcasted. So save the date for 19th and 20th of February, when we will discuss the final adopted text. We will also have by then Annex 2 available for a public consultation and discussion on all the supporting initiatives in relation to change management, as mentioned before. Consolidated advice pilots. This has been launched, is an initiative that has been launched in June this year. I understand that probably in the morning session you already had some details from previous speakers on this initiative, but it's really important because gives the opportunity to increase the dialogue between regulators and applicant, looking at SOP CTCG interaction for scientific aspect and pre-CTA questions of regulatory and administrative nature that are dealt by the CTCG. This initiative is going really well, I would say. Since the launch, we have received already 9 applications for pre-CTA, so questions of regulatory nature. Most of the applicants are asking questions about complex clinical trials and how best to submit in cities. And it's good to have this early dialogue with the CTCG. And we had so far 2 applications for the SOP CTCG connection on questions of scientific nature. Additional information on the other priority actions, and here you have some relevant links to published reports. Data analytics is a key focus area because we need to improve the use of data, increase accessibility of data, and in that respect we had a workshop in January this year. The recording of this workshop is available in the Active website, so if you want to listen to the discussion and read the report, you find there the relevant information as well as methodologies. Methodologies is an area that will grow even more and more in the future if we listen to our stakeholders' feedback on the need for further discussion on complex trials, pragmatic trials, real-world evidence. So far, the work that has been done is to establish a regular exchange between the NWP chairs, the CTCG chairs, and the HTAs to have a regular dialogue, and also the development of a best practice document, so common and standard approach when preparing guidance document on methodological aspects. Training, also of course very important. We are now focused on the training needs for academia and SME. In the initial version of the ACT-EU work plan, we had academia and SME as separated stakeholders target, but after further discussion and analysis, we have of course concluded that it would make sense to bring the 2 together because the needs might be similar. So we are now discussing also with colleagues at the EMA on defining a plan to consult academia and SME on training needs, and the stakeholders engagement exercise is planned. And then I also would like to mention that we have a dedicated team looking at public health emergencies trials. So of course this is done in close collaboration with the colleagues liaising with the ETF, the emergency task force. This is the slide that I mentioned before on the multi-stakeholder platform advisory group. This is what we consider in ACT-EU, if you want, a game changer, because it's really a platform that gives the possibility to regulators and stakeholders, different stakeholders group, to have a regular exchange. We have a regulatory co-chair, that is Maria Lamas from the Spanish Medicine Agency, and Denis Lacombe, the Chief Executive Officer of URTC. And then we have stakeholders that have been appointed from the different groups, so 5 from patients and consumers, 4 from industry trade association, 4 from healthcare professionals and academia, and funders. And we also have ad hoc participants. Of course, the ACT-EU regulatory partners are closely involved in the interaction with the advisory group, and we have ethics committee representatives. So in this way, we try to bring together really the key players to discuss openly what are the priorities from the different perspective. As you can imagine, we gather different feedback depending on the stakeholders group, but what is a priority for them. in the field of clinical trials. All the highlights of these meetings are published. The presentations are also published in case you are curious and you would like to have more information from the Active website. This is a visual to show you who is involved in this initiative. And I will now briefly conclude this first part mentioning few events, looking ahead what is keeping us busy. Next week we will have the ActEU multi-stakeholder platform annual meeting, so on Tuesday, 22nd of October, with the members of the advisory group that I mentioned before coming in person for the first time at the EMA. And this will be a broadcasted event. The agenda is published. Next step, listening to the stakeholders' feedback, discussing together the priorities that we see. This will then converge in the update of the ActEU multi-annual work plan, expected by the end of the year. And then for 2025, the workshop on ICHE6, as I mentioned before, and more dedicated workshops on methodologies, complex trials, pragmatic trials, as I said. This is the first part of the presentation on ActEU. I now have a few slides on the regulation in general and on CTIS before Francesca guides us through the public portal. For the regulation, this is a slide that we use quite frequently because it really gives a good flavor, a good indication on how the situation was fragmented under the Clinical Trials Directive, being transposed nationally with different requirements at member states level, while of course the regulation is applicable in its entirety in all the countries of the European Union, and is applicable as of the 31st of January 2022. CTIS is really the platform supporting the implementation of the CTR. This slide is just to give you some numbers, the latest statistics, and I think the document is about to be published today or hopefully by Monday. You have really a preview of the latest calculation from end of September. So we have now more than 80,000 clinical trials that have been submitted to CTIS. Of these, more than 4,000 are brand new or a new clinical trial application. 3,700 are transitions, which is really reassuring. It's a good message because lots of work is being done by all parties, and sponsors are now moving their clinical trials to cities, and some other application are resubmission. On the right-hand side, you can see the corresponding figures for authorized trials. If we want to have a look at some information on clinical trials by phase, of course, phase 2 and phase 3 trials are the most frequent, most commonly conducted trials in the oncology field. This is just to give you a flavor, as I said, of the content of these KPI reports, but you can find much more also in relation to substantial modifications submitted or addition of member states concerned. And one dedicated slide on transition. This is a kind reminder, not much time left, but the 30th of January, all the clinical trials will need to be in cities, and a further link to the guidance available to sponsors for additional clarification on the requirements. And I have a last slide about cities, because really cities is the backbone, is the structure, is the IT platform that is allowing all this transition to the regulation. As I mentioned before, is a radical change compared to what we've seen with EudraCT. One platform, one submission, the sponsors submit one dossier and select the member states concerned when they intend to conduct the clinical trials. Has not been an easy adaptation, I think, to the new requirements. I think we can all recognize that, but with a close collaboration with the member states and the dialogue with the sponsors, I think we are making great progress. This is just to give you a flavor of the different work streams where colleagues that are in the CTS team are really putting the effort on system stability. We have now over 15,000 applications submitted, continuous monitoring of performance and security, improvements also on the UI, on the user interface, a long requested need, and this has been prioritized for simplification to modify the rules for submission of substantial modification. So we know that the current implemented rules require the authorization of an application in all the member states before a modification can be submitted, and at least for part 2, this is expected to change soon. The revision of the public portal, the simplification task force, there is a dedicated work stream looking at how we can simplify and improve the system functionalities, and then the transition to Safe Agile, the application to the WHO to become a primary registry. We are already data provider, and then training and communication. So without going into all the details, we thought these slides would be important really to give you an overview of everything that is around cities and what is happening and being dealt by the team. And I think I'll stop here. Francesca, thanks.
Thank you very much, Laura. So here, just to conclude on the implementation of the revised transparency rules, as you know, transparency is a pillar for the clinical trial regulation. There is a specific article that requires us to be as much transparent as possible whilst protecting commercially confidential information, personal data, and any confidential information on the assessment conducted by member states. So the CTIS publication rules underwent a simplification process last year. As you may recall, we consulted many stakeholders, and thanks to these consultations, the revised transparency rules were drafted and endorsed then in October 2023 by the EMA Management Board. Those rules now foresee an earlier publication of key documents of interest that bring many benefits summarized in mainly 2 bullet points. One, it's that, of course, increases the public engagement and trust, and the other one is that allows a faster preparation of application dossier by the sponsors. Let me. So I'm gonna. Okay. So the principle of the revised transparency rules, I'm sure you're all familiar with them. They're all summarized in the quick user guide, and there was also an ad hoc bite-sized talk held in June 2024. But are also quickly summarized here. The clinical trials are made publicly available as per timelines based on their development phase. So we categorize the trials in 3 categories, and the population age. For most of the trials, the publication of data and documents occurs at the time of a member state decision of the application, while a few specificities are in place for early development phase trials, the so-called Category 1 trials, and the integrated phase 1 and 2 trials, which are still made publicly available, but with less information disclosed. And of course, the summary of results, as well as any posted CSR, are published upon submission of in CTs. There is here a table with the specificities that I just mentioned. I would like just to say that, to specify that the intermediate summary of results is not publicly available, as well as the documents on SMPC, the subject information and informed consent form, and recruitment arrangement for Category 1 trials are not publicly available. These are some questions that we receive sometimes, so I thought of including them here. Okay, so these rules, as I said, were endorsed in 2023. They became applicable almost immediately, because we released a Q&A where we clarified that sponsors could already upload some templates documents in the slot of the documents for publication that were no longer subject to publication. It took us a few months to technically implement them in the system, workspaces, and public portal, so we could launch the new CTIS public portal in June 2024. And this marked also the applicability of the revised transparency rules. As you know, there were some arrangements in place for trials that were submitted before the 18th of June. So the so-called historical trials do not have the documents published and only have their structured data. And of course, in order to have the documents published on those historical trials, sponsors would need to submit substantial modifications so that they can modify the documents and redact them accordingly. As of this week, over 6,000 trials are public, of which more than 2,600 with documents. And overall, we have almost 65,000 documents publicly available. The publication rules are summarized in the Annex 1 to the guidance document on how to approach the production of personal data and CCI. And both documents are published on the ActEU website as well as on our EMA corporate website, together with the relevant Q&A. You also have a detailed list of fields published, subject to publication for CTIS. That is an Excel document that you can also find on our corporate website. On the public portal, what you can search for is information on the trial identifiers and the therapeutic intent, the participants' inclusion and exclusion criteria, sponsor information, as well as contact details of the PI, the start and end dates, and any notification and corrective measures. Of course, so safety notifications are published after the assessment of member states. The documents that are made publicly available, as you know, are the protocol and the synopsis of the protocol, the SMPC when submitted, the recruitment arrangements, subject information and informed consent form, and summary of results and CSR if posted. I think how. So just to highlight that we implemented some very recent further changes on the public portal that regarded mainly the advanced search. Now people can look for trial status per member states, download search results and specific CT information, RSS feed, and major user interface improvements, such as, for example, having a dedicated section on trial documents, as well as a dedicated section for contact points and location, and some explanatory documents that are not for regulatory purposes, but only made publicly available for the public, okay, so in legal language. So just to add, so my presentation on transparency is concluded. I'm gonna just add a few slides. So now we have better, faster, and our aim is to have the better, faster, and optimized clinical trials. We have a single trial application covering up to 27 countries, which makes the submission of multi-country trials easier for sponsors. The process of supervision of clinical trials is streamlined. There are a higher standard of transparency with a publicly searchable database that includes also the documents, and the settings for academics and patients' care are outstanding. So how do you stay informed? You can subscribe to the CT Highlight newsletter and the new CTIS news flash, and follow the ActEU websites and contact the ActEU mailbox. And here I have a slide also on ad hoc for trainings and support. Specifically on the right-hand side, you can see some reference to the end-user trainings, our query management group Q&A, and step-by-step guide to register organization in CTIS, as well as some links to the handbook and training materials. A quick slide just to remind you that you would need to there is a training environment survey in order to access the CTIS training environment. And I think, okay, so there are some backup slides here that I included. I don't know if I have time to go through them. Yeah. Okay, so some tips for users on our help desk and CTIS website system release. You can go to our public website in order to know the system release as well as the list of known issues. Our colleagues are very good in updating this document whenever there is a known issue, so you can consult that one before opening a service desk ticket. When you open a service desk ticket, we kindly ask you to specify the EUCT number of your clinical trial, as well as any RFI number. And of course, to specify what is your username and role, and describe the step taken and any screenshot. The service desk, our service desk is monitoring daily your tickets, and also there is a daily prioritization of them according to their urgency. So here I also included some useful materials for transition trials, as well as for transparency.
Okay, so the regulation was adopted in December 2021 and is actually in force already since January 2022. It will become applicable from January 2025, and it was a deliverable under the EU Pharmaceutical Strategy 2020. The regulation creates a support framework and procedures for cooperation of member states in health technology assessment, and it's a mechanisms to submit evidence only once for joint clinical assessments at EU level. So it makes hopefully life easier for health technology developers. It also establishes common rules and methodologies for joint clinical assessments, and the vision behind this to improve patient access to innovative health technologies and strengthen the quality of HTA across the EU. The key principles of the regulation is that it looks at scientific clinical aspects of health technology assessments, which are still conducted by the member states. It aims to ensure high quality evidence-based decision-making and ensure transparency and inclusiveness in the process, in particular stakeholder engagement. The regulation puts the member states in the driving seat. So the member states' HTA bodies are in the driving seat as they form the member state coordination group on health technology assessment and its 4 subgroups. I will have a slide on that a bit later. And it also aims to ensure that this joint work is actually used in the national HTA processes. But the member states remain responsible for looking at the non-clinical aspects in a HTA process, drawing conclusions on the added value of health technology in their health systems, and taking decisions on pricing and reimbursement. The regulation has a stepwise approach in terms of bringing medicines in scope of the regulation. So on joint clinical assessments, the first 3 years will be about assessments of new cancer medicines and advanced therapy medicinal products. From January 2028, orphan medicinal products will be brought in scope, and from 2030, the full scope will apply, which means new medicines undergoing the centralized procedure. Also, the regulation creates the possibility to assess a selection of high-risk medical devices and in vitro diagnostic medical devices. This selection will be up to the coordination group to make. The coordination group already decided not to start joint clinical assessments on medical devices until 2026. So next year, there will be no JCAs for medical devices. Joint scientific consultations is another area of the joint work under the regulation. It's the early advice process that we heard from the European Medicines Agency, and it can be requested by the health technology developers to run in parallel with the European Medicines Agency scientific advice process, or to request the HTA only advice. A third area of the joint work is emerging health technologies, identifying emerging health technologies. We have a subgroup for that. It's to allow planning for the joint work. And there is a fourth area which is not on this slide because at the moment that is not really a priority. We are trying to cope with the mandatory scope of the regulation. So that is voluntary work. The member states can decide to undertake voluntary work on aspects that are not necessarily covered in the mandatory scope of the regulation. So the governance framework looks like this. We have the Member State Coordination Group on HTA, composed of Member States' HTA bodies and health authorities. We also have quite a number of health ministries there. Not only, some countries actually don't have dedicated agencies for health technology assessments. In the European Commission, we provide the secretariat. It means administrative support, technical support, and IT support. We organize a lot of meetings, especially in the preparatory phase, but I think that will continue in the future as well. We have created the HTA stakeholder network from patient organizations, health technology developers associations, health professionals organizations, and other NGOs in the field of health. I will have a slide on that. And we are working on developing the HTA IT platform where all the exchange of information will take place, whether it's about clinical assessment or joint scientific consultations or just information exchange among members of the stakeholders. It should all happen on the IT platform that is a secure environment. Of course, a lot of information will be published as well, made available to the general public through the Commission's website. And that's already the case because we publish, for instance, meeting minutes, guidance documents on the Commission website. So that's a slide explaining the role of the HTA Secretariat, because apart from organizing meetings, the regulation also defines specific roles that we will have to perform once the joint work really starts after January. We will be the central hub for information exchange and communication among all the parties. So for instance, if the assessor and co-assessor on a joint clinical assessment wants further information from the HTDs, then the Commission will go to the HTD and request that information. We will also be doing the completeness check of the dossier that the health technology developers submit. And at the end of the process, we will have to do a procedural check of the JCA reports before they can be considered approved and made public. We will also deal with the identification of patients, clinical experts, and other experts to be involved in joint clinical assessments and joint scientific consultations. And we will manage the conflict of interest framework, so the conflict of interest assessments for all the actors who are involved in this in the joint work. And we also chair the stakeholder network. Currently, we have 45 organizations and 2 observers in the stakeholder network. 15 of those are patient organizations, 13 health professional organizations, 7 health technology developers associations, and maybe you would be interested in knowing which are the 7 that are part of our stakeholder network. It's FPA, UCOPE, ARM, that is the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, Europa Bio, COSIR, that is an association of manufacturers of medical imaging machines and information technology, use of information technology in the medical field. We have MedTech Europe and Vaccines Europe as health technology developers associations in the stakeholder network. We have 4 learned societies, 3 payers, and 3 other NGOs. You may wonder who are the 2 observers and why are there observers. These are 2 international organizations, WHO Euro, which is an intergovernmental organization, so not among the categories of the stakeholders that the regulation defines, and the other one is EIT Health, which is a partly EU-funded project-based organization. Since there were so many organizations telling us that they missed the original call for applications, that was at the beginning of at the end of 2022. We opened a new call for applications in September, which closed on 9th of October, and we received 36 new applications. So we are currently assessing those. And when we have the next stakeholder network meeting, which is at the end of November, we hope that some of those organizations will be able to join that meeting already. I clicked, and so shall I click again? Okay. So we are also working as European Commission on the implementing acts to be adopted before the application date. And I was told that when I present, we have a legal officer who says that it's not the HTA Secretariat's job to do the implementing acts, it's the Commission job, but obviously it's our team that is working on the implementing act, but not with the Member States Coordination Group on Health Technology Assessment, but with the HTA Committee. If you are familiar with the so-called comitology process in the Commission, we had to create a Member State committee that accompanies this process of creating the implementing acts. They are consulted on these implementing acts and not the coordination group. And once they give positive opinion on the draft text, then it can go to Commission adoption. And so the first one on the procedural rules for joint clinical assessments of medicinal products was adopted in May. The procedural rules on cooperation with the European Medicines Agency was adopted today, this morning, so it will be published in the official journal next week, but the text is already available in the comitology register. And the third one, the management of conflict of interest, received positive opinion in the HTA committee at the end of September, so the text is available already on the comitology register, and we hope it's going to be adopted within the next few days. The remaining 3, so the JSC of medicinal products is in public consultation until the 29th of October. And once the public feedback is closed and the member states will assess the comments of the stakeholders, then we hope that an agreement can be reached on the final text and it can go also for adoption. And there are 2 others related to medical devices that are still in preparation. We are hoping that the public consultation on the joint scientific consultations for medical devices can be launched also, not in the distant future, but pretty soon. Okay, so we have, as I mentioned, we have a lot of information already on the HTA website. That's the web address where we publish minutes of meetings and guidance documents. Maybe I'm not clicking correctly because. Okay, so we have organized also a range of information events, and I'd also like to thank the stakeholders who organize information events about the health technology assessment regulations. We try to do our best to provide speakers for these stakeholder events. We cannot meet all the demands, but we are trying. So there have been regional information events organized by the European Commission and the heads of HTA agencies group since May last year. And the last of this series will happen in Paris on the 5th of November. It's primarily for stakeholders from Germany and France, and we will have speakers from Germany and France. But our co-organizers kindly agreed that online anybody can join this event. So we have already about 850 registered participants for online attendance, and you are welcome also to attend this information event, which will be held in Paris, but the on-site attendance is very, very limited. And then another event that is happening quite soon, on 15th of November, the chair and co-chairs of the coordination group and the subgroups will give a webinar for health technology developers on joint clinical assessments and joint scientific consultations for medicinal products. And already we published the registration link for this webinar. So please, I kindly invite you to register for this event. Okay, so that's our contact email address. If you have any questions, you can send questions to us. We try to reply. We receive quite a lot of questions, and we are working on a document that is the frequently asked questions document that we hope to publish before the end of this year. And just to conclude is that if you can click again, I think there are two other sentences. So we are creating a brand new system, and the commitment of all member states and all stakeholders is essential to ensure the smooth implementations. And I hand over to Anne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bella, for taking us through already why we have this HTA regulation. And I will try to take you more into the concept of joint clinical assessments, and specifically also then PICO, so patient population intervention, comparator and outcomes. And I must say I'm focusing on medicinal products, but of course, as Bella mentioned, we also have some on medical devices. Before I dive a bit more into what the process is for joint clinical assessments, I want to start with setting the scene between the difference between regulatory work and HTA work. And I think you all are very familiar with what the EMA does, so I keep that very short. But to summarize, that's on really the benefit risk assessment there. For HTA, health technology assessment, it is different. We have different questions because our assessment is comparative in nature. So we compare a technology X with something that is already existing, if any, or multiple. So that can be technology Y or any more. And we then really assess the relative effectiveness and the relative safety. And that is very important to keep in mind because while we may have similar data sets or evidence packages available, we have different questions. So probably the analysis that needs to be submitted are different compared to EMA. Bela has mentioned it as well, but just to repeat, the joint clinical assessment, and it's in the name, focuses on the clinical domains only. So there are also no value judgments and there are no conclusions on added value or on reimbursement. That remains the responsibility of the member states then to draw. You can see on this slide as well that I split up health technology assessment into what is under the regulation, and I just mentioned that. But because there is only the focus on the clinical domains, there are parts still to be done on the national level. So after a joint clinical assessment, health technology developers still have to submit to the member states for a reimbursement decision. This is what I call the appraisal phase, and any other arguments the member state need then will be added there. So for example, cost effectiveness, if that is needed, will be added there. And what is important is that the member states need to give due consideration to the joint clinical assessment when we have the national decision making. I'll come back to that later in a little bit more detail. So for the scope, I will keep that brief as well because Bela mentioned quite a bit of it already. I just highlighted here as well for JSC, so the Joint Scientific Consultations, as well as for Joint Clinical Assessment, the relevant articles from the HTA regulation, should you wish to receive more details. But what I want to highlight of this slide is the almost last bullet point, which is a link to our scientific specifications of medicinal products that will be subject to a joint clinical assessment. I invite you all to please read that document because it clarifies a lot already which products will be in scope. And one other addition as well is that also type 2 variations are in scope for the joint clinical assessment, but only as soon as we have published and completed the joint clinical assessment on the initial marketing authorization. So that is important to keep in mind. Then we have already some methodological guidances adopted by the HTA coordination group. They're on the website that Bela presented as well. So that is, for example, on direct and indirect comparisons, but also guidance on outcomes for JCA, a guidance on multiplicity issues. The specifications I mentioned, a very important document, and we recently also published the guidance on validity of clinical studies. We are still working on other guidances, for example, the scoping process, so that will give you some more clarity on how we define then our PICO, but also the guidance on how to fill the submission dossier template. That is expected quite soon, and I think that will be a very important document for you all as well. And then, Bela, can I quickly hand to you for the update on this early information?
Thank you, Anne. So the HTA Secretariat created this procedure for submission of early information for JCA because we would like to know what are the products that are coming for marketing authorization applications. And this is a piece of information that cannot be just handed by EMA to the European Commission because there is no legal instrument behind this. So it's a voluntary procedure that we created together with the EMA using their letter of intent. So in the letter of intent form at the EMA, the health technology developers can already signal, tick a box if they think that their product that they for which they submit a letter of intent to the EMA would be in scope of the HTA regulation. And following that, both are explained on the EMA website and on the Commission website. You can contact the HTA Secretariat in the Commission and ask for an upload link to our IT platform, which is a unique, secure link through which you can upload the same letter of intent that you sent to the European Medicines Agency to also send it to the HTA Secretariat. And the information from that letter of intent is used for planning purposes, to look for assessor, co-assessors, to start identifying patient, clinical, or other relevant expert for the actual procedure when the marketing authorization application comes, so that we don't start from nothing, but we have some information already in advance. So this is the procedure that we've created, and we are happy to see that quite a few health technology developers have already sent us information with this procedure. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella, for talking us through that. And it's very important to please submit indeed these letters of intent because, and I'm going through the process in a bit more detail here, but as you already can see, our process is very parallel to what you do with the process to submitting to EMA. We do not have the luxury of clock stops like EMA has and like you have with the EMA. And that means that for us, it is very important that we can start immediately at that process. So any information you can share with us, any realistic information, I must say, you can share with us on the timeline of your plan submission, but also the indication, that is very helpful. So please have a look at the process Bela just outlined. So then going through the JCA timeline, and I try to visualize it in a few bigger blocks, and underneath you see the EMA process for reference. The process I highlighted here is the process for initial marketing authorizations. So please keep that in mind. It looks different for accelerated procedures or type 2 variations, as you all know. Our timeline in JCA, so the one in green, also looks slightly different, but I'm highlighting here the initial marketing authorization. So we start at the same time, basically, as EMA start, and the implementing act already specifies that the health technology developer, at the time you submit to EMA, you also have to inform the HTA Secretariat and share relevant information with them, which is the SMPC, the clinical overview section of the submission to EMA, and for type 2 variations, also, of course, the new therapeutic indication. This information is very helpful for us because it also then allows us to search for the right assessor and co-assessor, but also for individual experts. Based on that, we start the scoping phase, and as soon as we have appointed the assessor and co-assessor, we officially start with the JCA. In the scoping phase, and I have more detailed slides on that, so I'll come back to that, we start to define our PICO, so that is the assessment scope. And we have to finalize that for the standard procedure 10 days after you receive the list of questions, so after the first clock stop, and 75 days after the start for the accelerated or the type 2 variations. Please note that these are maximum deadlines. So if we can be earlier, we of course will try to be earlier, but the Implementing Act specifies these maximum deadlines. When we share, and that happens via the HTA Secretariat, the scope with the health technology developer, that is where the timeline will start for the health technology developer to work on your dossier. So that is 100 days or 60 days respectively. So 100 days for the standard procedure. It is very short. We are expecting quite a high amount of PICOs, and it is quite in parallel to when you are working on your list of questions to EMA. So please do keep that in mind. When you then have your dossier ready, and I must say here that the dossier for the JCA is not the same dossier as you are submitting to EMA, because again, we have different questions and you have to address the PICOs that we ask. When you submit that, we then start with the completeness check, and that is what Bella also mentioned. The Secretariat does this check if you are in time and if you have complied with all the requirements also from the Implementing Act, for example. If needed, we will come back with missing information so that you can provide an update to your submission dossier. And should it remain incomplete after that still, then we can decide to discontinue the joint clinical assessment. But I want to say that is in no one's interest, because I think we all want to have a joint clinical assessment published, because it will also speed up the national appraisals in the member states. Then we started drafting of the joint clinical assessment. This includes also checkpoints with the individual experts, so patients and clinicians. And at any point during the assessment, if there is a need for any clarifying questions, the assessor and co-assessor via the HTA Secretariat can reach out to the health technology developer with clarifying information or clarifying questions. The health technology developer also can submit new evidence. Please inform us upfront if you are expecting it, and it can be submitted the latest until 7 days after the CHMP opinion. More details are provided in the Implementing Act, but I thought it would be helpful to know. Then there's, of course, also a reviewing process within our joint clinical assessment subgroup. And there is the opportunity for the health technology developer to do a factual accuracy check of this draft assessment report. It's in the name. You are only invited to check the facts and say if we cited things incorrectly, for example, but it's not an opportunity to start discussing on our interpretation of the results. And then we move into the final phase, so we finalize the joint clinical assessment. And here we have a very strict publication deadline that is both in the HTA regulation, but also in the implementing act. And it means that as a subgroup, we have to be ready with the joint clinical assessment report at the time the commission decision is given on the marketing authorization. So this is where, again, it is very much in parallel. And then for information, I include a slide where all steps are included here. I must say it's not necessarily the exact step where it happens. It's just a graphical indication to have a broad overview. Okay, and then very, very quickly, the relevant articles from the HTA regulation for the joint clinical assessment process. I will come back to the PICO, so I will not mention those. But the ones I want to mention is Article 10, so that's the obligations for the health technology developer. Please have a read also on there. And Article 13 on the member state obligations. And basically what is mentioned in those two articles is that the health technology developer cannot submit data again on a national level that has been submitted on a European level. So that's important to note. And for the member states' obligations, as I said, we have to give due consideration to the JCA report. But also, if we receive new evidence that actually had been part of our request on the European level, but was not submitted there, we need to share this information with the coordination group via the IT platform. So that is another way how relevant information can come back into the JCA process. So please do keep that in mind. So then the role of the PICO into the joint clinical assessment, and you will note here that I included a link to the UNETA guidance, and that is because we have not finalized the guidance under the coordination group yet, but it will follow quite soon. Concepts are roughly the same, so that is why I'm presenting it here today. And I will start with this a little bit controversial statement probably in this room, but that is that we believe a PICO should not be data-driven, but it should be based on the policy needs from our member states. We also feel very strongly about the inclusiveness, meaning that if a member state asks for something, we will reflect that in a PICO. And that also means that at this stage, we will not automatically omit a PICO if only one member state had asked for it. And that really comes from the fact that especially in Eastern European countries, there are different treatments available. They may not have the treatments that we have in Western Europe. So that is why it is for us important to be inclusive, because all member states need to be able to use the JCA report. We also realize that because the PICO will not be data-driven, we probably ask questions that is not studied in any of your clinical trials. Please do read carefully the guidances that are publicly available, because there may be ways that you can address it with indirect comparisons or any other analysis. But if there really is no opportunity to do so, please don't just leave the dossier empty, because then it will lead to the incompleteness, but always provide a justification so that we can assess if that justification is valid or something could have been done. But for us, it is important to also ask the questions where there is no data for, because we can then present the evidence gaps, and it helps us make better decisions on the national level. So what does PICO stand for? I mentioned before, patient population intervention comparator and outcomes. It is our assessment scope. So it is the questions we ask you. And in the P side, so it can be the full patient population that is applied for, or any subpopulations. And they then, of course, have to be defined as part of the full population. For the indication or intervention, it is, of course, the information about the intervention to be assessed, and it then reflects the applied for indication. And I do want to stress that any variations to the intervention, for example, dosing, they are potential effect modifiers, and therefore we would not require a separate PICO for that. For the C, so that is the comparators, the member states have to define them and have to define which comparators are relevant for them and which are the standard practice. And of note, the comparators can be approved or not. So also off-label comparators can be part of the PICOs we may ask. And then we have a few different scenarios and how member states have to ask them. I will not go into detail now, but this may have an effect on how we consolidate and present the final PICOs. And for the outcomes, again, we have a guidance on this, so please also read that carefully. Member states have to define their needs, and they then list the outcomes required, but the listing of this has to be free of any judgment or ranking. So what does the process look like for developing the PICO? It starts with the assessor and co-assessor coming up with a proposal. And this proposal, of course, also is based on the claimed indication you submit to EMA. And this then is transformed into a survey or something like a survey that is sent out to all member states that are part of the JCA subgroup. And they are requested to answer to that survey so that they can share their needs on the PICO. And in this, we also encourage the member states to seek input of their national patients and national clinical experts so that their PICOs really reflect the practice in their countries. After we have the input of all member states, it goes back to the assessor and co-assessor for what we then call the consolidation phase. And this is where the assessor and co-assessor try to come up with the lowest set possible of PICOs. But sometimes it's not possible to consolidate because it's a very unique PICO. And as I explained, we then keep it in. We have a meeting in the Joint Clinical Assessment Subgroup to discuss this and to validate this. And as soon as it's validated, the HTA Secretariat will share it with the health technology developer. And then the HTD is required to provide this evidence. Upon request of the health technology developer, there is also the opportunity to have an assessment scope explanation meeting. And in this meeting, we then will explain how the process for the PICO works and how we arrived to this PICO, but it will not be a meeting to discuss the PICO, and we will not make changes to the PICO. It just is to explain where it came from and what our expectations are. I mentioned briefly the submission dossier. I'm presenting here just a quick extract of the Annex 1 of the Joint Clinical Assessment Medicinal Product Implementing Act, just so that you see the level of detail that is mentioned here. And in Q4, so I realize that that's still a very vague date I mentioned there, we will publish also a guidance on how to fill the dossier. So that provides more information and also example tables, what you have to put into what section. But the annex itself is a quite high level, so it provides the chapters and the headers and the section headers on what you have to put in there. And it also shows in this table that there are some time points where you can make updates to the submission dossier, and that then will be annotated in this version history. And you probably can't read it on this slide, but it is specified that your literature search cannot be older than 3 months. That I also wanted to highlight because it's quite an important aspect. And then a few key takeaways, and that's my last slide, and then I'm happy to take any questions you may have on this. I think it's really important to highlight the need of the joint scientific consultations, because that's an opportunity for you to discuss also with HTA and potentially in parallel with the regulators, and it allows for us then to ensure the HTA needs are met. I mentioned it before, but please do read the methodological guidelines. They give very concrete ideas about what needs to be reported and what needs to be submitted. Also, please start predicting what PICOs may come your way and start predicting the landscape in Europe, because we are foreseeing quite a large amount of PICOs. So the earlier you are with the prediction yourself, the easier it will be to start the analysis there. Availability of data for us is very important. So please submit what you have, because I think this is really in the public health interest. And if we can, we really would like to find a way to limit any uncertainty about the final indication, because we know last minute changes can happen. And as I tried to explain in the process, we don't have really a luxury of a clock stop. So it is very difficult for us, but also for you to start amending that last minute.
Good afternoon. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start. Hello. Thank you very much. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So my name is Christelle Bouygues, and I will start the presentation. So So in this session on medical devices, this is all the topics we will try to cover one after the other. And I will start with presenting briefly the EMA role and responsibility in the area of medical devices. Then I will have a short presentation on medicines used in combination with medical devices, and in particular, the new requirement. My colleagues then will continue with presenting activities around companion diagnostics. Then after, another colleague will present the expert panel activities on high-risk devices. And finally, our last colleague will present activities to support development on medicinal products used in combination with devices. So to start with a brief introduction of EMA role and responsibility in the area of medical devices, this role has been growing up over the past years since the beginning of the MDR-IVDR. And however, it remains a limited role that EMA has in the space of medical devices. And internally, we have three main bodies being involved in different tasks. And to start, the CHMP has the role of assessing medicines medicines, which in certain number of cases could be also used in combination with devices. And in that case, there is requirements specific to the devices that will require the notified body involvement now. The CHMP also can be involved in tasks concerning consultation by the notified bodies on certain devices. And this concerns three types of consultation procedure, which take place in the context of a conformity assessment by the notified body. This concerns the consultation procedure for a companion diagnostic. The other consultation procedure is a consultation on ancillary medicinal substance that may be contained in a device. And the third one is a consultation for substance-based devices when systematically absorbed. And for those activities, it will be the CHMP. This is the CHMP that is involved internally. On the left side, the right side, we have also another body internally, which is the experts panel for which EMA is also providing the secretarial support. And the task for the experts panel cover consultation also by notified bodies in the context of their conformity assessment for high-risk devices only and in specific situations. Other activities which have been just for the time being piloting, it's trying to expand activities of the expert panel in the area of advice for still high-risk devices and also focusing on their remit, which is clinical matters. So that will be to provide advice on clinical development. And such advice can be requested by the device manufacturer. The second pilot in the area of advice by the expert panel is for orphan devices, and this can concern the designation or the clinical development. And in that case, the requester can be the device manufacturer or the notified body for the designation. Finally, there is also another task that has been assigned to the EMA is the monitoring of device shortages, but in a limited area in case of a public health emergency. And the body involved internally to support these monitoring activities is, there's a typo here, it should be MDSSG. For medical device storage steering group. Now I will move to the area of, I will focus on medicines that is used in combination with medical devices. And this interface becomes the products we can see through the centralized procedure represent quite a number of products coming with the use also of a device. And so far, what we've seen, it's quite low risk with simple devices from syringes, a pen, auto-injector, but we can see that there is more and more also complex devices now coming in this space, so with digital health technology. So this is creating also additional challenges in terms of requirements and interface with other bodies. So what is very important around the interface between the medicines frameworks and the medical device frameworks is to ensure and to have a clear understanding of the status of the products on the different components, whether we are dealing with a borderline products and whether the status of these products has been ascertained as either medicinal products or potentially a medical devices. In particular for substance-based devices, this can be an area where it requires quite primary clarification before engaging in the development. On the other aspects, when comes, we have clear ideas that we are dealing with the medicines, deal with the devices, but still sometimes the other component, the device, there may be sometimes situation where it requires some clarification, whether it's a device or a container closure system, because the requirements that will be requested for the marketing authorization will vary, can vary. And then the other situation where also, and I will come into this in the next slide, is understanding whether the presentation of the medicines with the device is integral or is a co-package combination. And also in the interface between these two frameworks, what is can be of a challenge is that there's a number of different players that may need to be involved. And in particular on the device side, there's more players also coming also into the regulation, the oversight of devices with the notified bodies, with the device national competent authorities, and also the Commission having an important role with the medical device coordination group issuing the guidance. In terms of medicines used in combination of medical devices, we can identify three types of combinations. So the one we called integral, then co-package, or the later one, which is when a device is referenced only in the PI, but product information, but this is not supplied together with the medicine. So coming back to the configuration of an integral device that forms an integral part with a medicinal products. This one is formally defined in the medical device regulation as a single integral product. And what is important is that this configuration should be at the time of placing on the market, and it's not looking at whether it's an integral product at the time of administration. So this is an important aspect to have in mind. It should be only intended exclusively for this use, so it's already the combination is yet fixed, and it's not reusable, also an important criteria. And in such scenario, what has been is new with the medical device regulation is that there is this famous Article 117 requirement from the medical device regulation, where now for the device component, there is a need to provide depending of the risk class of the product, is to provide either notified body opinions when the risk class required the notified body involvement. So this needs to be anticipated because it could take time, a couple of months to get to obtain the notified body opinion. And this is needed prior to the opinion for a marketing authorization. So alternatively to the notified body opinion, it can be a C certificate, but quite rare for those kind of devices that are integral, or if it's a low risk devices, it can be even a declaration of conformity. For co-package devices, what has been clarified also in consultation with the Commission is that the co-package device component needs to comply fully with the medical device regulation requirements. So it means it will need to obtain a CE certificate or a declaration of conformity by the time of the placing on the market of this co-package presentation. On the third presentation, it's more obvious because indeed the device is not supplied with the medicines, and of course the device will need to comply fully with the medical device or IVDR requirement, and will need to be CE certificate to obtain a certificate of conformity or a declaration of conformity. And on the side, I have mentioned also a quality guideline that has been developed by the CHMP to provide also clarification on what is the expectation in terms of more technical scientific requirement to be addressed in the marketing authorization application. Moving just also to the guideline I just mentioned, I think in this guideline, the core precept that has been clarified is that EMA is responsible for the assessment of the medicine. So when we are dealing with an integral drug device combination, the overall combination is regulated as a medicine. So the medicines regulators will have the full responsibility regarding this use in combination, and a number of aspects will be required to ensure the safe and effective use of the two elements together. However, the notified bodies will need to be involved for the assessment of the general safety and performance requirements for ensuring their compliance with those requirements, which are laid down in the Annex 1 of the Medical Device Regulation. And this is the remit of the notified body to perform this assessment. On the marketing authorization holder, the applicant will have the duty to ask for these notified body opinions prior to ideally the submission of the application, but at the latest, this needs to be provided prior to the opinion. The aim is to try as much as possible to avoid overlap of assessment or requirement of data, double assessment of the data. However, it is acknowledged that there might be some data that can be seen from the different perspective of the medicine regulators and the notified bodies. Just reflecting on the experience we had since the implementation of this measure. So it is important to ensure that you obtain a notified body opinion that conclude on a full compliance. We've seen cases where sometimes there was just a conclusion on partial compliance, highlighting a few deficiencies that was expecting to be addressed at the stage of the marketing authorization application. So we've clarified those situations that those deficiencies will need to be addressed directly with the notified body, and in order to obtain at the end a notified body opinion that will show a full compliance. Also, we've noted sometimes some notified body opinions perhaps missing to reflect on the intended use of the device with the medicines, and we think that it's important that there's really that's a correspondence between the two documents, that the notified body opinions on what is applied for in the marketing authorization shows also a full correspondence between the two. So if we are dealing with a syringe that is as measuring function, that it's also clearly reflected in the notified body opinion. In terms of last aspects also, which sometimes has triggered a little bit of discussion, it's about the device qualification or classification. And because we've seen sometimes different risk class assigned to prefilled syringes without needle, despite sometimes questioning a bit one with the other classification, we understand that this is really the remit of the applicant and the notified body to assess this. In terms of the life cycle management of integral device combination, so it's one thing to have an initial notified body opinion, but it will need also to be maintained as in parallel of the life cycle of the medicinal products. And recently, in an update of the Q&A on the MDR IVDR implementation, so an EMA CMDH question answer document, we've tried this year to come up with some further clarification of in the situation in which we would expect to see a new revised notified body opinions coming with a variation, one extension. And in particular, the situation identified as in case you are introducing a new device, or there would be major changes to an existing device, such as a change to the device, addition or replacement of an integral device part, the performance characteristics, but overall that those changes may have a significant impact on the delivery or the quality of the product. And the third is that the change also it can be also when there's a change potentially in the formulation of the products, its viscosity or something that may impact the performance or the safety of the device. And this also may need the provision of a revised or an updated notified body opinion. If there's no need to provide one, what we would expect is to have a justification on that. This justification is provided in the module 3.2R. On here, I'm just finishing with a few references. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So in the next 10 minutes, I will try to illustrate an overview of the IVDR requirement and the EMA consultation process for the companion diagnostic. Before starting with the more technical part of the presentation, I would like to highlight how comes that now, recently, we talk so much about biomarkers and the companion diagnostic. So precision medicine is critical to many development programs nowadays. And if in 1990 there was 5% of the drug approval were for target therapies, in the last 5 years, more than 1/3 of the oncology products are approved as personalized medicine. So we passed, for instance, in oncology, from all the chemotherapy that was no target, that has low precision and a lot of massive collateral damage, to a more target therapy. And here you can see the increase on the number of medicinal products that are target, for which biomarkers are important. Another aspect that I would like to clarify before to get into the more technical part is a definition of biomarker and definition of in vitro diagnostic. This is a simple concept, but sometimes we are not all in the same page. So allow me to just spend a few words on this. So the biomarkers is a characteristic that is measured as an indicator of normal biological process or pathogenic process. And it can also be seen as a biomarker as in response to exposure to intervention. The biomarkers can be of various type, like molecular, histologic, radiographic, or physiological characteristic. The in vitro diagnostic test is a well-defined system that is used to measure the biomarker status. And it can include the specimen, analyte, instrument, all the tools that are needed to analyze the biomarkers. As you can see here, I didn't touch upon companion diagnostic because the definition of companion diagnostic is slightly more complicated and complex. So as the EU legal definition of companion diagnostic, as for Article 2.7, is that a companion diagnostic is a medical device essential for the safe and effective use of the corresponding medicinal product to identify patients that benefit from the corresponding medicinal product use, or identify patients that are at risk of serious adverse reaction. So here you can see there is the medicinal product component and the in vitro diagnostic component, and together they do the companion diagnostic component. Since coming into force in 2022, of the IVD regulation, EMA has acquired a new mandate. So based on Article 48, before issuing a certification, the notified body, which is responsible for the technical assessment certification to a companion diagnostic, need to consult the relevant competent authorities. That for centralized product is the EMA. So what does it mean need to go to the regulatory authority? It needs that they need to present data or package a document that will allow the competent authority to look to the suitability of the device in relation to that specific medicinal product. in simple term, and how does this work? So the notified body that is responsible for this certification will prepare a draft summary of safety and performance and the instruction for use, and will send this document to the competent authority. And the competent authority will look to the suitability of that medical device in relation to the medicinal product. They will issue an opinion that is sent back to the notified body, and the notified body need to take in due consideration the opinion of the competent authorities. This closes the circle. After that, the notified body will issue the certification. So this process is, let's have a look at what does it mean to look for the suitability of the companion diagnostic. The aspect that is looked into when looking for the suitability of a companion diagnostic is the scientific validity and the rationale to choosing that biomarker. Is the biomarker able to identify is the test able to identify the biomarkers that we are looking at? And is the population selected with that test, the real population that we want to select to treat with that medicinal product? This process is independent from the medicinal product marketing authorization application. It is an independent process. Still, at the time of the medicinal product, the marketing authorization application, we expect to see for medicinal product for which the patients are selected based on the identification of the biomarker, we expect some information concerning the test and concerning the biomarkers used. And this information can be found in the EMA website, but basically we expect to see the rationale for using that biomarker, which analytical method was used, PCR, immunohistochemistry, any type of tools that has been used, and also some discussion or presentation of the analytical clinical validation that was done and the strategy for the use of this diagnostic. So this is in terms of the marketing authorization application. All what I have presented in the regarding the consultation procedure and the what we expect in the marketing authorization application document can be found in this link in the relevant document published in the EMA website. I should not forget that for any question related to the companion diagnostic biomarker with the use of the medicinal product, scientific advice is of use. So question can be posed, scientific question can be posed regarding the use of the biomarkers with that medicinal product. So bottom line, I would just summarize what I just presented with some take-home message, and I go in reverse order. So information on biomarker test should be included at the time of submission of marketing authorization applications. And there is, I would like to point out this document that is published in the EMA website, that is the frequently asked questions, which really has a lot of good information and answer to probably your question, how to prepare the document for submission of a marketing authorization application, which type of information should be put in the SMPC, etc. So I encourage you, if you have a medicinal product where the population is selected by a biomarker, to go and look to this document. Second, for any companion diagnostic of centralized product, EMA need to be consulted by the notified body on the suitability of the CDX. And what we'll look in the consultation procedure is the scientific validity of the test, analytical and clinical performance of the test. And I stop here and I give to my colleague.
Good afternoon. My name is Hilde Bastards, and I will give you some insights into the expert panel's activities on high-risk medical devices and IVDs. So, So I will explain you what the expert panels are, what is the composition, what is their role, and also what is the role of the European Medicines Agency in their activities. Then secondly, I will explain about the scientific advice to manufacturers for high-risk medical devices, also the activities of the expert panels in support to manufacturers and notified bodies for orphan medical devices. And then finally, I will provide some very concise information on the consultation procedures for certain high-risk medical devices, the so-called CECP procedure, respectively the high-risk in vitro diagnostics, which is the PECP procedure. So, okay. So this slide gives you an overview of who the expert panels are. So in fact, it is a group of advisors set up according to some of the articles of the medical device regulation and the IVDR, so the in vitro medical device regulation. So they have been set up to support the scientific assessment and to provide advice in the field of high-risk medical devices and high-risk in vitro diagnostic medical devices. I will explain you later on which ones are these high-risk devices. So, but first, let's talk about the expert panels. So, in fact, on the right-hand side, you see there is a central list of available experts. From these experts are temporarily assigned in order to provide or to be eligible to function as part of an expert panel. So it's kind of the central list is a kind of reserve list for appointments. So from the central list, the expert panels are assigned. So there are, as you see, 12 different expert panels. So first of all, there is a screening panel. They are mainly involved in the screening phase of a clinical evaluation consultation procedure. I will explain you later on what that exactly is. And then there are 11 thematic expert panels who are individuals who are highly specialized in a certain clinical domain. So you see there is an orthopedic panel, a circulatory system panel, neurology, respiratory system, etc. Then these expert panels are supervised, so to say, by a coordination committee, which is composed by the chairs and vice chairs of the thematic panels plus representatives of the screening panel. And now finally, what is the agency's role? Well, we provide administrative, technical and scientific support to the expert panels in accordance with the so-called extended mandate regulation. This kind of activities is relatively new, so it started in 2022. Okay, this is about who are the expert panels. Now the what is exactly the role of the panels? So this is in fact the red line that you see over there. That is in fact the submission of a medical device dossier to the notified body. As you all probably know very well, medical devices are certified by notified bodies. So the notified bodies take, in fact, the role of they are the responsible bodies for the conformity assessment. So the red line is the submission of a dossier. What is to the left is the development phase of a medical device. And as you see, there are it's possible for medical device developers to come for early scientific advice on the clinical development strategy and or the orphan status of a high-risk medical device. On the other hand, there is also the possibility to come for late scientific advice. That's both that option for late advice is there for manufacturers, but also for notified bodies, both on the orphan status of a device and or on the clinical data package for the conformity assessment of certain high-risk orphan medical devices. Then what you see then to the right of the red line to the that's about the conformity assessment. So as part of the conformity assessment, notified bodies have to consult the expert panels for certain high-risk medical devices and for certain high-risk in vitro diagnostics. So these consultation procedures, these are mandatory procedures. So the MDR and the IVDR give conditions under which for these high-risk devices, notified bodies should consult expert panels. It's mandatory, so there is no way to escape, so to say. But you see to the left, these scientific advice procedures and the orphan advice procedure, these are voluntary procedures. So the manufacturers or the notified bodies have the option to come for scientific advice. So it's not mandatory. And it's also important to say that this is really clinical advice only. Okay, then let's please allow me to say now a few words on what exactly we mean by high-risk medical devices. So as you probably know, the MDR provides 4 risk categories for medical devices, depending on the risk of the body, invasiveness, etc. So most of the medical devices are in the lowest risk category. These are class 1 devices, like, for instance, a wheelchair. Then you have class 2A. Then you have class 2B. And only for the active class 2B devices which are intended to administer or remove a medicinal product from the body, the expert panels intervene. And then you have on top the highest risk class medical devices, which are the class 3 devices, for instance, devices that are in contact with the brain, or pacemakers, joint replacement devices, breast implants are an example of these. I forgot to say for the class 2B active ARMPs, as an example of these are infusion pumps and ventilators. To the right of this slide, you see the definition of a medical device from the Medical Device Regulation. I'm not going to read this, probably you are very much aware of this. Then what are high-risk in vitro diagnostic medical devices? The IVDR, similarly to the MDR, foresees 4 risk categories, but has provided letters to indicate, to label these categories. So from class A, B, C, and D. Highest risk is class D. For instance, a kit used for HIV testing or for blood typing testing of donor blood. So for the class D, certain class D IVDs, again, the expert panel, so more specifically the IVD thematic panel will intervene, and we will be consulted by the notified body in course of the conformity assessment. Then let me explain you something on the scientific advice pilot. So we have organized a pilot that enabled the expert panels to provide clinical scientific advice to manufacturers of high-risk medical devices. That pilot was composed of 3 phases. We are now at the end of the 3rd phase, and we are currently preparing this scientific advice procedure for regular service, which is anticipated to start in 2025. Then what kind of questions are received from applicants on these high-risk medical devices? Well, of course, since it is clinical advice, all the questions are, of course, also clinically related. So questions on the clinical development strategy, trial designs like on the study population, how many subjects? Well, we propose that number of subjects. We propose that comparator. Do you agree? Do you agree with the proposed endpoints for the study duration, follow-up points, the design, single-arm trial, an RCT trial, the biostatistics, and then often companies also come with questions on their proposed post-market clinical follow-up plan. On the next slide gives you an idea on which clinical areas are most frequently consulted. So as you see, the circulatory system panel and the orthopedics panel were most involved. As you see in the middle, 70% of the questions came from SMEs like you. And of course, since it was a pilot, we also had to have applied some prioritization criteria. So we have prioritized for that pilot questions coming from companies who were developing a device for a small patient population, unmet medical need, and also novel innovative devices. Okay, let me now give you some explanation on the currently ongoing orphan pilot. Very recently, the MDCG published a guidance on the clinical evaluation of orphan medical devices. So what is an orphan medical devices? A device, the expert panel can assign an orphan status to a device if it meets a number of criteria. I've listed them there. So first of all, if the device is specifically intended to benefit patients for treatment, diagnosis, or prevention of a disease or condition that presents in not more than 12,000 individuals in the European Union per year. And then also at least one of the following criteria is met. So insufficiency of available alternative options for treatment, diagnosis, or prevention, or if the device will offer an option that will give really an expected clinical benefit compared to the available state-of-the-art alternatives. Okay, then that orphan pilot that started in July, and it runs until the end of next year, subject to available resources. So it focuses on orphan medical devices and medical devices for an orphan subpopulation. And it gives advice to manufacturers on the possible orphan device status and on the clinical evaluation of orphan medical devices, also to notified bodies. So manufacturers can come for early or late advice, notified bodies, obviously, mainly for late advice, because typically a manufacturer will usually consult with a notified body or have a notified body towards the end of development. So the overall goal of this orphan pilot is to help bring new orphan medical devices onto the EU market, while also keeping legacy orphan medical devices that are already certified according to the Medical Devices Directive, but still have to make the transition to the MDR to facilitate that transfer. Okay. I will quickly go over this. So also for this orphan program, there is a certain group of orphan medical devices that will be prioritized, like devices for a life-threatening condition or causing a permanent impairment of a body function, devices for children, and novel devices with a potential major clinical benefits. If you need more information on the orphan pilot, I've put there the link to a recent webinar that was provided to help manufacturers. This is just a very brief an overview of this orphan procedure. So you can come either for the orphan designation status only, or you can come for orphan designation plus advice on the clinical development strategy. Okay, and then a last word on the consultation procedure. So the mandatory procedures. So these consultation procedures are there for, well, the notified bodies have to consult expert panels for the high risk classes, as I said. So for the medical devices, this procedure is the CCP, and for the IVDRs, the procedure is called PCP. The expert panel's opinions and views under these procedures are available on the European Commission's website. If you are interested, you can take a look to get an idea on what is exactly the content of these documents. Okay, the take-home messages are the following. So as I said, expert panels can provide clinical advice to manufacturers of high-risk medical devices. Pilots are closed, but in 2025, a regular scientific advice service will be implemented. Secondly, in context of the ongoing orphan pilot, expert panels can give advice to manufacturers of high-risk medical devices and or notified bodies on the potential orphan status of a medical device, optionally or in conjunction with clinical advice, which can be early or late. And finally, during the conformity assessment of certain high-risk devices, notified bodies must consult the expert panels, who then provide an opinion on the notified body's assessment of the clinical evaluation, the so-called CCP procedure for medical devices, or a view on the manufacturer's assessment of the clinical performance of the IVD. And this procedure is the performance evaluation consultation procedure. Thank you very much for your attention. I will now give the word to my colleague Stina, who will talk about combination products.
Thank you very much, Hilde, and good afternoon. My name is Stina Orum. I work in the Scientific Advice Office at the EMA. It has been already a lot of information. I hope you still can bear with me a couple of minutes. So I will talk about the agency activities to support development of medicinal products used in combination with medical devices or companion diagnostics. So I will tell you about the focus group on the provision of scientific advice for medicinal products used in combination with devices. I will also brief you about the combined project as well as on the EMA activities on digital health technologies. So as you know, and as you have heard today, the implementation of the MDR and the IVDR have changed the EU legal framework for medical devices with new responsibilities for the agency, for national competent authorities and the notified bodies. As these products that are used in combination with devices also need to comply with the legal framework for medicinal products, it is a complex ecosystem for development and approval. And at the same time, we are also seeing an increasing number of combination products, and they also may have a higher complexity compared to the older devices. So there is a need to develop more connectivity and synergies. And the initiative to bring such connectivity and synergies is the Combined project, which is specifically looking at combined studies that are regulated under 3 different frameworks, so the CTR, MDR, IVDR. And what is then meant with the combined studies? So there is an informal definition, which is that when you have a clinical trial of a medicinal product together with a performance study of an IVD or a clinical investigation of a medical device in one and the same study, then it's a combined study. On this slide, you can see initiatives that exist to support the clinical trial authorization, the clinical trial environment, development and life cycle of combination products. On the medicine side, there is the ACT EU, while we have just heard about the scientific advice pilot on high-risk devices and orphan devices on the devices side. So I will now continue to take you through on the initiatives in the interface between these two areas. So I will start with the focus group work. So this the basis for this focus group work was that developers, you raised us that there is a need for scientific and regulatory advice to ensure that it is possible to identify an appropriate development path for both the medicine and the medical device or the companion diagnostic. And therefore, in the research and stakeholder platform meeting in December 22, it was decided to establish a focus group with members from the Scientific Advice Working Party, devices and IVD experts from the national competent authorities, industry, notified bodies, and EMA. That would explore options how it could be possible to provide scientific advice for this type of combinations and to integrate different perspectives and ultimately to run a pilot with these multi-stakeholders. Last year, the group analyzed 9 real-world-based cases. However, finally, it was not possible to initiate a pilot because the notified bodies are not allowed to engage in pre-certification discussions. And therefore, it was decided to rather publish the results of these discussions in a scientific publication. And this publication is now in its final review phase, as well as to proceed with other follow-up actions. And in these follow-up actions, we are exploring the complementarity between the Scientific Advice Working Party and the expert panels. And we are also looking into the possibilities of involving national competent authority experts with device competence in EMA scientific advice. We continue our collaboration with the European Commission, and we also look into the options and specific actions within ACT EU and Combine. And we will also keep an eye on the notified body position paper that is about to come. So then I will move on to the Combine. So if you do not know, the Combine is a project launched by the member states' competent authorities for clinical trials and medical devices and the European Commission. And it aims to analyze the root causes of the challenges that are encountered by sponsors in conducting combined studies and to find possible solutions to these challenges. So the first phase of this project was to analyze the issues, and this phase has now been completed, and there is a report published that you can find on this web page. And at this point of time, this project is being reshaped into a stepwise program, and it is entering into the phase 2, which will be about finding solutions. So this program will be working across the different fields with different established expert groups, and the agency will continue supporting this program. Then I will finally tell you about the EMA activities on digital health technologies. So we are seeing, we are experiencing that we are having a growing experience in scientific advice and qualification for digital health technologies that are used for evidence generation to support medicinal product benefit risk assessment. So for example, the first digital health technology based primary endpoint, efficacy endpoint was received its qualification opinion, and this is in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We are also offering ITF meetings where informal feedback can be provided, and these meetings can have cross-disciplinary experts involved. We have also published questions and answers documents on qualification of digital health technology-based methodologies to support approval of medicinal products. There is also a scientific paper that has been published. Last year, there was a workshop on qualification of novel methodologies, which had a dedicated session on digital AI and machine learning-based method qualification. And on this slide, you find the links to the workshop with further information. Internally, we also have some matrix activities, and most recently, the artificial intelligence reflection paper that was led by EMA Methodology Working Party was recently published. So to summarize, the EMA is fully committed to facilitate the regulatory interface between medical devices and medicines. The focus group explored multi-stakeholder scientific advice possibilities for medicinal products that are used in combination with medical devices or companion diagnostics. And here you can watch the space for the publication. And EMA is to continue its support to the combined program. And we also have formal and informal forums for discussion with multidisciplinary groups that are in place to foster increased dialogue and engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so Claudia and I will present about the new fee regulation today, and especially what it means for small and medium-sized enterprises. I will, on the first few slides, give a general overview about the new fee regulation and changes before Claudia then will go more into detail of the practical implications for SMEs. So the current fee regulation is in place for quite some time already, 1995, and there was a first attempt by the European Commission to revise the fee regulation in 2010, which was then reprioritized. In 2015 and the following years, then the European Commission worked again on revising the EMA fee system and came to a proposal in 2022. This was then finally negotiated with the Parliament and the Council, so that an adopted version of the new fee regulation was available and published in 2024 in this year and will be applicable as of 1st of January 2025. In the future, we will have a single framework of a fee regulation, so not different fee regulations, but one single framework. And the fees payable will be based on the actual workload and the costs behind. So they will be proportionate to the work which is carried out by EMA and the NCAs, so the network, and reflect the actual costs of and the assessment of the complex evaluations behind. In a nutshell, on a high level, the main changes. So overall, the new fee regulation will be a simplification of the fee system. And it will include an update of the fee structure calculated per procedure. We will have a modification of the administrative fee in case of a withdrawal or in case of a change of the intended submission date. What is also new is that for some of the procedures, for example, for scientific advice, certificates, or parallel distribution, there will be a prepayment process introduced. So that means first the payment needs to be done and then the assessment starts. What is also very important, let's say in terms of change management activities, next to all the technical developments which we're doing in-house, we have, of course, a lot on the agenda in terms of change management. And here, for example, the regulatory guidance documents. So we are updating a lot of documents, user guides, also the external NFR, or the external fee website. And also we are working on a section on frequently asked questions. So where currently there are the fee regulations, supported then by the explanatory note and implementing rules. We'll have in the future the regulation, which will be supported with the working arrangements, which clarify what is what is outlined in the regulation. So the future fee regulation, of course, includes information about the fees, the charges, also the annual fees, and also SME incentives. The working arrangements will clarify some of the terminology of the fee regulation, will explain further about the fee reductions, and give some practical information, for example, about payment modalities. So the working arrangements, they're also published already on our EMA Fee website, will clarify further what is written in the new fee regulation. What is important to mention is that we are just talking here about an update of the fee regulation. For example, the SME regulation and all other regulations stay applicable, of course, so they're not changing. We're just talking about the new fee regulation changes here. What we're also currently finalizing is the so-called fee Q&As. So you will see on the EMA Fee website then a big bunch of questions and answers published about regular questions which support you with the application. Yeah, and then I hand over to you, Claudia.
Thank you. Okay, let's dive into operational changes and the impact for the small and medium enterprises. So the reduction that we are providing are with the new fee regulation are maintained, aligned, and improved. So currently, as pointed out by Patrick, they are scattered in various legal provisions and split into two pieces of fee regulations, and also clarify in other several documents in our websites. So we want to streamline and aligning the information. Of course, we have now only two legal bases, the SME regulation and the new fee regulation that is aligned with the working arrangements. All the previous reductions are maintained, and there is, however, clarity and alignment on applicability. So now we are going into looking at the main impact. This is not the whole list of procedures that are in the annexes of the new fee regulation. These are only the main impacted changes. So let's start with new procedures that are fee related. Pre-submission activities that currently have no fee. In the future, they will have a request, upon request of a pre-submission activities. There is a fee due when the applicant submits a letter of intent, and also a fee charge each time the intended submission date is changed, because this is has been highlighted. It's putting a lot of administrative work behind, both for us and the national competent authority. So we highlighted as an additional cost, and this is outside the framework of SME incentives, so there will be no SME incentives linked, so you will have to pay the fee, the small fee that is linked to this procedure. Pediatric application is also new, a new fee. The currently is not charged, in the future will not be charged. The fee is in the fee regulation as stated but waived. However, there will be an administrative fee charge if the company or the applicant withdraw the application after 24 hours from its submission. The good news is this is an administrative charge, therefore is waived for SMEs. So I think it's the same aspect is for orphan designation request. Currently, there is no fee linked to this request. In the future, there is a fee, but it's waived. And the same administrative charge is applicable when the applicant withdraws its application. And this charge, nevertheless, is waived for small and medium enterprises. And that goes for any other administrative charge provided in the new fee regulation, being for any application that is withdrawn more than 24 hours from its submission or rejected upon validation. This fee, still of 4,400, will be, of course, waived for small and medium enterprises. Now, this is quite a big change in terms of amount. Currently, the fee is charged for initial marketing authorization application on the basis of 3 basic fee level, and is also charged on the content of the application for additional strengths or forms or presentation. So there is a cost linked to the composition of the product. There is a simplification, no charges anymore for strength, form, or presentation. However, the categorization of the fee is different from according to its legal basis. And the fee range, depending on the legal basis, start from 33,300 up to 865,200 for an application of a new active substance. And the current provision applicable for SME are still valid upon the fact that the SME status has to be valid at the time of submission. May I remind you that the SME incentives is a fee deferral until the outcome of the marketing authorization application, and there is another % fee reduction for designated orphan medicinal product applied by a valid SME. So these provisions are still remaining. In the context of re-examination of procedure, this is another new fee that is currently not charged. And in the future, if upon a negative opinion, the applicant requests a fee for examination, requests a re-examination, there will be a new fee that is based on the initial fee, so linked to the legal basis, and will be up to, sorry, not up, it will be 30% of that initial fee applied. And for this, there is no SME incentive. So you have to take into consideration this matter as well, if you request a re-examination of a procedure. In the context of the annual fee, doesn't change much apart from the amount. The amount are increased. Again, the 3 fee levels are still maintained, but the range is moving from between 60,300 for the lower legal basis fee, usually as generics or hybrid, to 232,400 euro. And this is, again, an annual fee for centrally authorized product. This is different from the annual fee from the pharmacovigilance medicinal annual fee for nationally authorized product. The SME incentives that are applicable now are still valid, so they are subject to 40% fee reduction for small and medium, and 100% for micro-sized companies. For variation, again, there is a simplification. On variation, currently we have 5 fee levels, 3 for major variation type 2, 2 for minor variation type 1, and 4 charges for work sharing. In the future, there is a simplification. There will be only two fee levels applicable for type 2 extension, for type 2, one for extension of indication that is subject to a higher fee. And for all the remaining type 2 variation, there will be quite a reduced fee, 22,000 compared to now. It's heavily reduced, and this is valid for all the remaining type 2 variations. So if you have an extension of indication where an assessment is quite substantial, the fee will be subject to the higher level, while for all the other type 2 variation, the fee is heavily reduced. The good news that is with the new fee regulation, there will be no fees for minor variation type 1. That, of course, are then moved to the cost of maintenance for the annual fee. And there will be only one charge for work sharing or major variation of type 2, so no other fee linked to minor variation. What has been removed? It has been removed, the capping for grouping has been removed for variation of type 2 because of the fact of the lower fee will be applicable. With this, the same incentives will be applied as of now, so 40% and 100% if you are micro. Extension of marketing authorization. Again, there is a simplification here. We dropped the fee for additional strength form of presentation at this point, but the 3 levels of fee still remain for extensions. For referrals, referrals also have now a change. We move from 5 different fee levels applicable only for pharmacovigilance referrals. We move to 9 different fee levels, including pharmacovigilance and non-pharmacovigilance referrals. However, of these 9 fee levels, 3 type of referrals legal basis fee will be waived. So therefore, there will be no amount to be charged to the marketing authorization holder for these 3 different legal bases. The modality of calculation of the referral, pharmacovigilance and non-pharmacovigilance, subject to a fee, will be calculated in the same fashion as it is now with the pharmacovigilance referral, so with the chargeable unit, data-driven calculation. There will be no possibility to declare the SME status after the referral is notified or after the invoice is received. This is a provision of the pharmacovigilance fee regulation that is dropped with the new fee regulation. So it's either you are an SME at the time of the notification and the applicable incentive will be applied, or not. And the SME incentive, of course, still remain 40% fee reduction for SME and 100% for micro. Now we're moving into the area of the prepayments. As my colleague Patrick explained, there are some provision or procedure where they will be subject to receive the fee before the process and the service will be delivered from us. One is the request of certificates, but the good news is that the SME incentive currently applicable will still be applicable, so you have 100% fee reduction, provided that you have a valid status of SME at submission. Scientific advice is also another very much used fee procedure by SMEs. And the current provision foresees 6 basic fee levels, 3 for initial and 3 for follow-up advice. There is a distinction between quality of the fee level, between quality, safety, and clinical development, qualification, and bioequivalence studies. Currently, the SME status needs to be valid by the time the scientific advice procedure starts. In the future, we move from 6 to 3 fee level, so we dropped the fee level for follow-up. The fee range is not changing much with the new fee regulation for initial applications, for initial scientific advice application. The distinction between quality, non-clinical, clinical, qualification by equivalence, and novel methodology still remains in these categories of the 3 fee levels. But what it is important is that the payment method will change and the terms of the payment applicable will be evaluated upon validation and with the receipt of a prepayment before the procedure can start. And the SME status, again, needs to be valid at the time of submission. Otherwise, the incentive will not be calculated. The incentives provision still remain the same, 90% fee reduction for small and medium enterprise and for micro enterprises. However, the 100% is applicable if the request is linked to scientific advice for a product with a designated orphan validity. I think here we have the process, current and future on and the changes that will be applicable. So now currently the applicant applies, the EMA in parallel deliver the service while financially also issue the invoice, and the delivery of the service is not linked to the payment of such invoice, and it may be that the payment will be received after the scientific advice has been provided. In the future, we want to, from 1st of January, the applicant applies for the service via the platform, via IRIS, and in the case of an SME, needs to have a valid SME status at submission of the request. We will issue immediately an invoice that you need to pay within 30 days, but as soon as possible, to be honest, because this is very much linked to the flow of start of the procedural advice, and there is a blockage in terms of that the procedure cannot start if the payment of the invoice has not been received. And if this payment has not been received within the 30 days, the application will be cancelled. So you need to resubmit again in case of non-payment. I think there is another process for the expected timelines for allocation of payments. So you once the payment, the applicant makes the payment to EMA, we will quickly check your payment against the bank transfer reference that the payer must quote with the exact EMA invoice number. This is very important in order for us to link your application with the payment received in our bank account, and within 24 hours, we need to make this link. And on day 3, we will unblock in the system the blockage that the procedure should continue or not. In this way, all the financial workflow has been has been run before the date of start, and with this we provide you the service. If there are problems in the automation of the reference of the bank transfers against the invoice number, but you demonstrate that the payment has been received, we will have a manual processing on the unblockage, but this may entail a delay on the start of your procedure of scientific advice. So we want to avoid this as much as possible, but there will be still the possibility to run it manually and for you to receive the service from EMA. So these are the key takeaways for SMEs. I hope I'm not late. We have scientific advice fees levels are reduced. There is no distinction between initial and follow-up advice. There are new fees for examination and pre-submission activities. There is a new prepayment method for scientific advice and certificate. The SME status must be valid at the time of submission in order for you to benefit of the fee reduction. The EMA explanatory note will be replaced by question and answer on fees to be published next month. And all current provision in terms of SME fee incentives will still be applicable. We have guidances. We have also past events that are our public system demo, and coming up we have a webinar for industry stakeholder, not necessarily diving into the SME reduction, but the overall changes, and we will have another public system demo on the 12th of December, so look out also for this opportunity to get more information. We have a dedicated mailbox for all your questions, and we're trying to answer, or of course some of the questions will be also in the question and answer published in our website very soon. But please use this the opportunity to send your question to nfr@ema.europe.eu for further clarification. Okay, thank you very much.
As described, we are here to give you an overview of the work that we are doing to improve the availability of medicines, but then also, of course, to outline what that means to you as SMEs in particular. A short overview of what we are going to talk about today. So I will open the session giving you basically a short overview of the context, the legal basis, the EU-level coordination that is connected to that, but also want to make it very concrete with examples outlining deliverables, but also the toolkit, the MSSG toolkit. Then I will give the floor over to João, my colleague, who will go into the more practical side of things, I suppose you can say it like that, focusing very much on shortage reporting, the obligations connected to that, and also focusing very much on the European shortages monitoring platform before closing with other important developments in this area before we close with conclusions. Then, without further ado, jumping right into the context setting. So when we talk about shortage management in the EU, I think it's very safe to say that the improving of the availability of medicines is something that is of utmost importance and a priority really to the European Medicines Regulatory Network. We all know that shortages are multifaceted in the root cause and also are impacting across borders. So it's really important that regulatory authorities really work together and not only collaborate, but have an increased collaboration in this regard to prevent shortages, but also to limit their impact once shortages occur. So to this end, in 2016, the EMA task force on the availability of authorized medicines was established, and the point of this group was really to understand what strategic support can we facilitate to make sure that that we can really look into disruptions and tackle these disruptions on
on medicine supply and ensure their availability. And I want to say that, of course, this coordination and collaboration since 2016 has only increased in recent years, also, of course, due to COVID-19. And one major development that I want to outline and emphasize here is, of course, the EMA extended mandate. So as you all know, the EMA had, of course, a really big role when it came to the management of COVID-19, not only when it comes to the for vaccines and therapeutics, but then also, of course, when it comes to crisis preparedness and management. So as a result of this ad hoc activities that the EMA was facilitating during that time, post-pandemic, the EMA role was, let's say, formalized via the extended mandate through Regulation 2022-123 to really have a structured outcome on the tasks that the EMA has done. Now, what does that mean concretely? You see that in these 4 boxes that you on the slide. One is that the extended mandate really gives the EMA a role when it comes to the monitoring and the mitigation of potential and actual shortages of medicines. So we now have processes and also tools available when it comes to the reporting of shortages, but also when it comes to the coordination of responses on EU level, all in the context of a public health emergency or a major event. Number 3 is the establishment of the Medicines Shortage Steering Group, the MSSG, and this is supported by the SPOC Working Party. And of course, there are also obligations now when it comes to the pharmaceutical companies to have the relevant context there. And last but not least, it also foresees the development of the European Shortages Monitoring Platform. All of these concepts we will go into a bit more detail in a couple of minutes. Now, we already talked a little bit about the task force. I wanted to give a bit more context as to the different groups that we have established and how they work together when it comes to shortage management on EU level. So we talked about the task force. This is really meant to be a supply and availability hub. This group operates in normal circumstances. Now, what do I mean when I say normal circumstances? So this is really the situation when there's no crisis. There is no crisis on the horizon. So this is really the status quo, let's put it like that. Now, then we have the MSSG, who is also meant to operate in crisis and preparedness times. This is really a situation where we have a public health emergency, a major event, and then the preparedness is, let's say, the step prior to that, when we are looking at preparing for potential situations that are occurring. As I mentioned before, this group is connected and supported by the SPOC Working Party. This is where the shortage experts in the national competent authorities sit, and they really have the task to monitor any upcoming shortages or anything that may need to be flagged to the MSSG for this executive group then to come up with opinions, recommendations, and all really to help manage these activities. And of course, all of these groups interact and coordinate with each other. This is just a short overview to give you an idea of deliverables and to make it very concrete what these different groups are doing. This is very much focused on the task force and the main deliverables that were established in 2023. We have linked all of this, so of course, if there's interest after this, very happy for you to have a read through. I don't want to go through everything, but maybe one thing to really highlight is the good practice guidance for industry, which really outlines guidance on how to prevent medicine shortages. For example, earlier notification. Just as an example, the union list, of course, is potentially something that you have heard about, which the EMA has also established a first version in December last year, and of course the development of shortage prevention and mitigation plans. then now to make it really, really concrete, we wanted to bring a case study today for you. And we wanted to bring the example of antibiotics. So as you may all be aware, when in 2022, 2023, we had, of course, an issue when it came to the availability of antibiotics. And this was flagged to us in November by SPOC Working Party members. So they highlighted that they had a lot of critical shortages of antibiotics in their countries. And we then went and did a root cause analysis, really tried to understand what are the causes of this, and realized very soon that this is due to the reduced production capacity of marketing authorization holders that came to be during COVID. So then after that, in the year to follow, when we then went into the flu season and when there was an increase in colds and in respiratory infections, marketing authorization holders were not able to deal with that increased demand. So that led to shortages impacting over 28 European and European Economic Area countries, but also regions globally. And as you may be aware, there was also a lot of media attention in regards to this, but also political pressure, of course, on EU level and on national level, of course, also following COVID. Now, what did we do? So this is really to give you a bit of an outline of the different activities that we, in collaboration with NCAs and with marketing authorization holders, have been doing. So on SPOC Working Party level, there was a dedicated subgroup established to really understand what are the root causes, what is the extent of the situation. We connected and engaged with marketing authorization holders as well to understand what could be potential mitigation measures. But then, of course, we also collaborated with the Commission, with international regulators, with EDQM and trade associations as well. On the executive level, on MSSG level, what we've done was to share best practices, so a toolkit to really help mitigate measures. There were regulatory flexibilities established and also executed. Marketing authorization holders were asked to present in front of the MSSG. But also, of course, because this was such a public case of a shortage, I want to say, there was, of course, also public communications and a shortage catalog published. So what was the outcome then of this? So we had very clear visibility of who are the most impacted marketing authorization holders, what are the root causes. As I mentioned before, we were able to implement regulatory mitigation measures, looked at regulatory flexibilities as well. Also then for the next season, it was very clear that we don't want to be in a situation like this again. So that together with DG HERA, we were able to map the supply and the demand to understand where is the gap potentially for next year. And then, of course, the MSSG was also then able to publish recommendations proactively in regards to preparedness activities. So then, hopefully, you didn't hear a lot of crisis reporting on this in the following year, because indeed, in the autumn and winter season of 23-24, we had a significantly improved supply situation, and of course, there were a few critical shortages, but that was manageable with the cooperation and collaboration with marketing authorization holders. So that was a short case study just to bring it to life. And I don't want to go into too much detail on this slide, but here we have a couple of points outlined of what are the toolkits or what are the instruments available to the MSSG to tackle critical shortages. We have linked the document on the slide below as well. But I think showcasing that via the case study was helpful to really bring this to life. And now happy to give you the floor to continue.
Thanks, Sandra. Good afternoon, everyone. So we move a bit from all these existing governance structures that we have currently in the EU shortages system to a bit more the practicalities when it comes to the submission requirements and also how shortages can also be submitted to the relevant regulators, in this particular case to the EMA. So we start very quickly, and again, without spending much time on this one, on what are the current provisions within either the regulation or the directive. I mean, they pretty much say that obviously companies have a supply continuity obligation, and in that respect, obviously in the event that they face a certain supply disruption, they have to notify this to national regulators or to the EMA 2 months in advance. This is pretty much the current as is. I mean, everyone knows that with the review or the reform of the pharmaceutical legislation, there are also changes in the version that we saw landing in April 2023, but this is currently how it stands. Now, it's also important to bring up something that is deriving from the EMA regulation on the extended mandate. And this is basically, again, all this regulation that Sandra was describing, very much focused on shortage crisis management and the creation of one particular requirement, which is the identification of an industry single point of contact person for supply and shortage issues. This is very much, I mean, if we can establish here a quick analogy, what the 2010 pharmacovigilance legislation drew for the creation of the qualified person for pharmacovigilance, so someone also in charge of pharmacovigilance operations. We have exactly the same now, but for shortage and supply issues, and actually it's very helpful for regulators to have that identified contact person because, again, someone with a proper oversight on supply chain management and in charge of a supply chain overview allows us also to have bidirectional exchanges when it comes to discussing contingencies or remedial actions around shortage prevention and mitigation. So very quickly, because Sandra very nicely highlighted the differences between peacetime/routine reporting against crisis. The reporting requirements for crisis are a bit more detailed when we are actually upon a public health emergency or a major event. So for the routine reporting, and this is actually already happening, this is the as is, we have companies submitting shortage information, be that, for example, information around shortage root causes or shortage duration. We have information again around remedial actions and again, what are the company strategies to address shortages from happening or mitigating those from occurring. Information on impact assessment, including also identification of clinical alternatives, because it's also very important for regulators to draw the relevant actions in terms of regulatory support to companies. So again, a requirement on submissions for any actual or potential shortage. And again, with the anticipation that again, in the event that if anything happens throughout the shortage life cycle, that information is also updated to regulators. Now, on crisis, we have, as we said, just additional requirements, again, information on, and in all these obligations coming from the crisis regulation with the EMA extended mandate, same level of information when it comes to shortage details, details around also companies' contingencies with preventive and mitigating measures, additional data on market share and sales forecast, and importantly, data on manufacturing information. So currently, there are no existing public health emergency lists or lists of critical medicines for major events. We had two, one for Mpox, another for COVID. And again, those are very much driven by WHO declaration of public health emergencies and also recognition by the Commission, but currently those are not active. Okay, so this one, and again, this is very quickly a very quick view on the granular details around how and what to submit to regulators, both in crisis and also peacetime. So here, you really see here basically what's the level of details that regulators request. We've just gone through those. Now, coming to the practical aspects and the submission and the role of companies on submitting this data, particularly SMEs to the EMA. So in the event that you face a supply disruption that's linked to GMP non-compliance issue or quality defect, that is pretty much emailed through a public folder, a mailbox, so that it has to be submitted to the EMA inspections team, people in charge of handling quality defects, but also at the same time to the EMA shortages team. And this is basically the contact mailbox availability spoc@ema.europa.eu, which is pretty much our mailbox to handle those incoming submissions. Importantly, if any of the shortage root cause is unrelated to quality or GMP non-compliance issues, we have also, again, a submission that has to be sent to that particular mailbox. But here we have to have the submission through the Annex 1 of the Guidance for Detection and Notification of Shortages for Companies that was published back in 2019. And from there, we triage and we trigger all his management activities. We talked about ISPOC registration. Again, this is very important for us in the context of our shortage management activities, both nationally but also centrally. So this is a requirement currently under EU law. And again, all MAGs in the Union, regardless the licensing route, are supposed to have this identified contact person for shortages, as we just discussed before. Right, so next we talk about the SMP, so the European Shortage Monitoring Platform. So could I have just a quick show of hands to see if anyone has not heard of the SMP? Okay, so it means everyone is on top of the SMP, which is going to make our life pretty much easier right now. We're going to rush through this one. So very quickly, it's perhaps one of the current largest IT projects that we have at EMA, and it's one of the big deliverables from the EMA extended mandate. The delivery deadline is February 2025. So here you currently see sort of the primary key functionalities that are around the platform development. So a lot of that comes with collecting data both from industry and from member states. So again, a lot of these activities are linked to crisis. So this is what the scope of the SMP is about right now. Important information when it comes to reporting. So there will be also public interface and a public dashboard to access this data, and we'll have the relevant reporting tools based on trend analysis by compiling data from industry and matching that against demand and needs from member states. We'll be able to draw conclusions when it comes to either early signals or confirmed disruptions for shortages during crisis events. And importantly, is also helping us out also with establishment of this list of critical medicines that also Sandra alluded to when she defined the scope of the EMA mandate in crisis. Now, there's a great deal of information that the ESMP project management team has been releasing into the public domain. So here you see a series of materials that concern Q&As, implementation guides, but also importantly, training, technical training for industry, including SMEs, on how to go about, again, submission under the SMP from February next year. Now, this is pretty much, I'm just going to quote very quickly what's the vision under the regulation. So again, a platform that allows fast exchange of information and importantly helps us case managing shortages in crisis situations, but also to give you a bit more the practical view that goes beyond what's defined under regulation is really the fact that next time that we have sort of a public health emergency or a major event, we have a way, a tool to actually collect good quality data that's pretty much let's say standardized according to what are the relevant requirements. And again, we'll put regulators together with industry in a position to discuss existing shortages and to prevent those from occurring in the first place. Now, quick view on the delivery timeline. So we said that the deadline is February 2025. Very quickly, again, we are involving industry and also national authorities, subject matter experts into the development of the ESMP. We currently through testing phases also with colleagues that have been appointed, as we said, from industry and national authorities. We have also some functionalities from the SMP that will go live earlier than the set deadline. So we have November as the date where we're going to phase out actually one of the important functionalities, and this is actually the reporting of cap shortages outside of crisis. So what we're saying that is currently happening as is with submissions through mailboxes will start being phased out from the ESMP from November onwards. We'll have some sort of a transitional period, but you'll find a bit more details when it comes to those incoming submissions. On this live webinar, again, this is a message that colleagues from the SMP team asked us to convey. We'll have tentatively on the 20th of November webinar also to inform on the rollout of this new functionality for cap shortage reporting outside of crisis. Okay, so we're coming pretty much to the end, and just looking ahead of what's coming today, you have heard also other aspects linked to things that are deriving from the reform of the pharmaceutical regulation. So coming to the aspect of shortages, shortages is actually one of the 6 priority strategic objectives. There's actually a huge focus when it comes to security of supply, but also shortage prevention. For those that might be familiar, there's information that's coming, again, in the context of that version that we got to see in April last year when it comes to earlier reporting deadlines for industry, and at the same time an harmonization of how shortages and also withdrawals from the market or marketing cessations will be communicated also to regulators, and importantly the formalization in regulation of also the establishment of shortage prevention and mitigation plans. So also higher responsibilities for authorities and also for the EMA in the management of critical shortages. We talked the SMP will be also having an extended scope, and also a lot of the work that is also defined under the regulation has already begun, and this has mostly to do with the development of the union list of critical medicines that Sandra described before, but also, as we said, the work on shortage prevention and mitigation plans. Those templates for shortage prevention and mitigation plans, they have just been published in late June this year, and from next year we'll have a piloting phase that will help us implementing those ahead of the reform. Now, that's the reform. Before we conclude, just also to give you a heads up on what's been this October 2023 communication on shortages from the Commission. So this has been basically a series of non-legislative measures that have been announced by the Commission. So the EMA has actually also, and particularly our team, has been at the forefront working on advancing a lot of these actions. So a lot of these actions take into account a lot of these deliverables that we mentioned already: the union list, the shortage prevention and mitigation plans, the establishment of voluntary solidarity mechanism in the union, so solidarity exchange between member states in the event that their national efforts are proven insufficient. And there's also information when it comes to public procurement that's being developed by the Commission. Now, at the same time, that communication very much looks ahead and pinpoints a series of industrial measures or industrial policy recommendations concerning addressing structural vulnerabilities in the supply chain of critical medicines. That's pretty much, for most of you that have already heard, part of the CMA, again, recommendations that will be available also in the strategic report of ERA's CMA activities, and also the activities of ERA very much focused right now when it comes to looking into actions on enhancing manufacturing capacity, but also looking to international partnerships for supply also across other worldwide jurisdictions. So already the end, quick conclusions here and takeaways. So indeed, the governance structures that have been set up by the EMA, I mean, they pretty much meet on a monthly basis. So a lot of those outcomes from both MSSG, but also the Spoke Working Party, they published on the EMA shortages page. We talked a bit about this change in paradigm from reactive shortage management to proactive and predictive coordination and management. This is very important to us, and this is also why the rollout of the shortage prevention plans and also the guidance on industry shortage prevention that Sandra has also mentioned is so important, also to try to work together with industry from preventing that shortages take place. Talked about the SMP, again, the requirement and the EU legislation to have an ISPOC identified, very important. The deadline to submit ISPOCs was September 2022, but we're still welcoming registrations. Save the date for the rollout of the first functionality for the SMP from November. Keep an eye on this one. There will be more information communicated also to cap holders. And finally, again, what it means also for the regulatory network and for the pharmaceutical system, the reform of the pharmaceutical legislation, and again, the actions that will be further developed to try to prevent, again, shortages from happening and to strengthen supply security in Europe for critical medicines. And I think that concludes from our side.